Good evening, night owls, and welcome to Whisper Crowley, the place where stories linger long after the lights go out. Tonight, we prepared chilling tales paired with the soothing sound of rain to ignite your imagination and make your heart race. If you feel the cold creeping in, tap that like button. It helps keep the shadows alive. Tell us in the comments where you're listening from or share the scariest moment that sent shivers down your spine. Don't forget to subscribe. You wouldn't want to miss what lurks in the darkness ahead. The fire lizard of Louisiana. I remember the first time I saw it. It was late at night, and the air hung thick with moisture, as it always did in the swamps of Louisiana. The kind of damp that clings to your skin, never letting go. I had been working in the area for weeks, cleaning up the old cabins by the bayou. The locals had been telling me stories for years, strange ones, about something that moved through the swamps, something that burned like fire. They called it the fire lizard. At first, I thought they were just stories, folklore to keep the kids entertained, or to scare off those like me who weren't familiar with the land. But then, one evening, something happened that made me start to question what I'd always dismissed. It started with a flicker, a light in the distance. I had just stepped out of one of the old cabins, my flashlight in hand. The swamp was quiet, the kind of stillness that always seemed wrong, like the world was holding its breath. Then, as if it had been waiting for me, I saw it. A red glow, pulsing faintly, flickering through the trees. It wasn't the usual fireflies or the distant light of a lantern. This was something different. The light seemed to move. It darted between the trees, faster than any person could move. For a moment, I thought I was imagining it, but then I heard something. A faint crackle, like the sound of flames licking the air. My heart raced. The swamp was dangerous, sure. But this was something else. Something unnatural. I tried to tell myself it was nothing. A trick of the light, maybe something from the nearby oil rigs reflecting off the water. But the more I stared into the trees, the more certain I became. There was something out there, something alive. And it was close. I could feel it watching me, its presence heavy in the air. I turned quickly, as if that would somehow shake the feeling, but I knew deep down that it wasn't over. That glow, that strange, burning light, was still out there, waiting. I didn't want to go any deeper into the swamp, but I also couldn't just leave. The fear I felt wasn't the kind that makes you run away. It was the kind that keeps you rooted in place, like something was pulling at you, forcing you to stay and face whatever was out there. A few moments passed, or maybe it was longer. The sound of the water lapping against the shore filled my ears, but that red glow, the one that didn't belong, lingered in my mind. I should have turned back, but curiosity is a strange thing. It pulled me toward the bayou, toward the unknown. I stepped closer to the water, trying to be quiet. That's when I saw the footprints. Large, heavy, scorch marks in the dirt. They were fresh, the ground still smoldering where something had passed through. And there, in the middle of the trail, a single scale, red as the fire itself, glistened in the dim light. I froze. For a moment, I wondered if I was going mad, if the fear had somehow clouded my judgment. But then the wind shifted, and I heard it again, the crackling. This time, closer. Much closer. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat as I turned toward the source of the sound. The trees in the distance shook, and for the briefest moment, I saw it, a figure, long and twisted, moving through the underbrush with the speed of a shadow. Its scales glowed, bright red like embers, and for an instant, I saw its eyes. They burned with an otherworldly light, glowing, unblinking, watching me. In that moment, I understood. This wasn't a creature of nature. It wasn't a trick or a myth. The fire lizard was real, and it was coming for me. My breath caught in my throat as I backed away, my foot catching on a root hidden in the dark. I stumbled but caught myself, my pulse pounding in my ears. That thing, whatever it was still out there. I could feel it, its presence closing in, like the air itself was tightening around me. I tried to calm myself. Maybe it hadn't seen me. Maybe I could just slip away, back to the cabin where it was safe. But the logical part of my brain was drowned out by the primal instinct to flee, the deep, gut-wrenching knowledge that something was hunting me. Something that wasn't human. I moved silently through the underbrush, my flashlight shaking in my hand, barely cutting through the thick darkness. The swamp around me seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy, the stillness almost suffocating. I could hear the hum of insects, the occasional croak of a frog, but the air felt too quiet, like everything was holding its breath, waiting for something terrible to happen. Then, I heard it again. The crackle of fire. It was closer now. The sound of it, the flickering, moving sound, echoed in the swamp. I spun around, every nerve in my body on high alert. Nothing. The trees loomed around me like silent sentinels, and I was suddenly very aware of how isolated I was. But then I saw it again. That red glow. It was faint at first, just a flicker, but it grew brighter, moving in my direction. It wasn't a trick of the light. It was real. And it was getting closer. My mind raced. There had to be an explanation, something logical. Maybe it was a fire, a campfire from someone else out here. Maybe the glow was just the reflection of some kind of animal's eyes. But as I looked at the scorch marks in the ground, the large, deep imprints that looked like they had been burned into the earth, I knew better. This wasn't a normal animal. And this wasn't a normal fire. I felt my body tense, every instinct screaming at me to run, but I couldn't. Not yet. I had to know what this was. I had to see it for myself, for reasons I couldn't fully explain. I was afraid, yes, but there was also a part of me, curiosity, maybe, that couldn't walk away from it. The glow flickered again, just ahead of me. I moved closer, slowly, trying to stay as quiet as possible, the sound of my breath harsh in my ears. Every crack of a twig beneath my foot seemed to echo too loudly, as if the swamp itself were conspiring to give away my position. Then I saw it. Through the trees, the figure emerged. It was massive, taller than any man, and it moved with an eerie grace. Its long, scaled body shimmered in the dim light, each scale glowing a deep, fiery red, pulsing like the heart of an inferno. I could see the muscles ripple beneath its skin as it moved, its eyes, a brilliant, fiery orange, fixed on something in the distance. And then, I realized, it wasn't just a creature moving through the swamp. It was hunting. I held my breath, hoping that somehow, it wouldn't notice me, but it turned its head, its eyes locking onto mine. The fear that washed over me was unlike anything I had ever felt. It was the kind of terror that freezes you in place, the kind that leaves you powerless, a mere speck in the face of something so much greater, so much more terrifying. My body tensed, the instinct to run almost overwhelming. But before I could make a move, the creature's lips parted, revealing rows of sharp teeth, and it let out a low, guttural hiss, a sound that vibrated in the air, sending a shiver down my spine. I couldn't explain it, but I could feel it. This thing wasn't just hunting for food. It was hunting for something else. Something darker. I didn't wait around to find out what it wanted. The moment that hiss split the air, I turned and ran. The swamp became a blur around me, the trees, the mud, everything blending into a chaotic mess of shadows and light. My heart hammered in my chest, my breath coming in ragged gasps as I sprinted through the thick undergrowth. The sound of my feet splashing in the water was drowned out by the sound of the creature following me. Its steps were heavy and deliberate, the ground shaking with each movement. I dared not look back, but I could feel it. The fire lizard was gaining on me. The further I ran, the more the swamp seemed to close in around me, the trees growing tighter, the air heavier, as if the very land was becoming part of the hunt. The red glow of the creature's scales illuminated the swamp behind me, casting long, eerie shadows that danced and twisted in the night. I wasn't going to make it. I knew it. There was no way out. And then, just as I thought I could run no longer, the ground beneath me gave way. I stumbled, my foot slipping into a deep, muddy hole, and I fell hard. Everything went black. When I woke up, everything was different. The mud, the cold water, the sticky swamp air, it all felt so distant now, as if I had been transported to another world. My body ached from the fall, but the sharp sting of pain reminded me I was still alive. I gasped for breath, my lungs burning as I struggled to sit up. Where was I? I blinked, my vision blurry, and slowly, the shapes around me began to clear. It wasn't the swamp. It wasn't the trees or the water I had been running through. I was inside something. It was damp and dark, the air thick with the smell of wet earth and decay. I was in a tunnel, a narrow, claustrophobic tunnel that seemed to stretch endlessly in both directions. The walls were rough, jagged stone, and the ground beneath me was uneven, filled with puddles of stagnant water. For a moment, I thought I had dreamt everything, the fire lizard, the glowing red eyes, the terror. But then, I heard it. The sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate steps. I froze. My mind scrambled, trying to understand how I had gotten here. Had the creature chased me into these tunnels? Had it somehow dragged me down into its lair? I shivered at the thought. The last thing I remembered was falling, but I couldn't recall how or why. The steps grew louder, echoing down the dark passage, and I knew with a gut-wrenching certainty that I wasn't alone. The fire lizard hadn't just been chasing me through the swamp, it had followed me here. I crawled to my feet, my knees shaking beneath me. My flashlight, still clutched tightly in my hand, flickered and sputtered as I turned it on. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing more of the tunnel, more of the endless stone corridor that seemed to stretch on forever. The air was heavy with moisture, and the sound of dripping water filled the silence, making every little noise feel magnified. I tried to focus, to think rationally. Maybe I wasn't in immediate danger. Maybe the creature hadn't found me yet. Maybe this was just a nightmare, a very vivid, very real nightmare. But as I took a cautious step forward, a low growl echoed through the tunnel. My blood ran cold. It was close. I turned, my heart hammering in my chest, but the tunnel was just as empty as before. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it, its presence, like a weight pressing down on me from all directions. It was hunting me, just as it had in the swamp. And now, I was trapped. I couldn't go back the way I came. I had no idea where I was, how far I had fallen, or how deep these tunnels stretched. I took a deep breath and forced my legs to move, trying to steady my shaking hands as I crept deeper into the darkness. The sound of the creature's footsteps was growing louder, closer, almost too close. I glanced over my shoulder every few seconds, half expecting to see the red glow of its eyes behind me. But all I saw were the same damp stone walls stretching on into nothing. The tunnel twisted, turning sharply at one point, and I followed it, hoping it would lead somewhere, anywhere, that wasn't where I had come from. But the further I went, the more oppressive the darkness became. The walls seemed to close in around me, and the air grew thicker, heavier, making it harder to breathe. I stopped for a moment, my back pressed against the cold stone, trying to listen. My own heartbeat was the loudest sound in my ears. But then, I heard something else. A faint scraping, followed by a low hiss. I froze, holding my breath. It was real. The creature was close. I could hear it moving, its claws scraping against the stone floor, slow and methodical. It was circling me, hunting, like a predator toying with its prey. My skin crawled at the thought. I couldn't stay here. I had to keep moving. But where? I pushed myself off the wall, moving as quietly as I could, my flashlight being trembling in my hand. The scraping noise continued, closer now, louder with each passing second. The fire lizard was getting closer, and I had no idea how to escape. Then, in the distance, I saw something. A faint light. I blinked, unsure if it was real, but the light grew stronger, pulsing like the red glow I had seen earlier. My heart raced, but I didn't hesitate. I started running toward it, my legs aching, my mind screaming at me to keep moving, to get to the light. But as I neared it, I realized something horrifying. It wasn't an exit. It was a trap. The glow intensified, revealing more of the tunnel. It was an opening, but not one that would lead me out of here. No, this was where the fire lizard was waiting. And just as I realized that, the ground beneath me shook, and I heard a roar, a deafening, guttural sound that seemed to reverberate through the very walls of the tunnel. I was too late. The light, now blinding, burned my eyes as the creature emerged from the shadows, its scales glowing like molten lava, its eyes locked on mine. And in that moment, I knew there was no escape. I couldn't breathe. The air was thick with dread, my chest tightening as I felt the creature's presence drawing near, suffocating me with its heat. The fire lizard was getting closer. It was not just a creature of the swamp anymore, it had become something much worse, something older. It was hunting me. I turned and ran. There was no time to think, no time to hesitate. The tunnel seemed to stretch on endlessly, its walls pressing in on me, narrowing, tightening as though the earth itself wanted to crush me. I could hear its footsteps behind me, heavy, deliberate, like thunder rolling across the sky, getting closer with every passing second. I couldn't outrun it. I could feel it. The heat, the presence, it was coming. The sound of its footfalls echoed in my head, drowning out everything else. I stumbled, my foot catching on something, sending me tumbling forward. I barely caught myself, my hands scraping against the cold stone, my breath ragged and shallow. I had to keep moving, but it was no use. I felt its heat before I saw it, an intense, suffocating warmth radiating from somewhere ahead. I dared to glance back, just for a moment, but all I saw was the faint glow of its eyes piercing the darkness. The creature was close, much closer than I had feared. My heart was pounding, each beat deafening in my chest. I couldn't escape. There was nowhere to go. I heard it then, a low growl, deep and guttural. It sent chills down my spine. I wanted to scream, but my throat was tight. The air was thick with something else now, something burning, like the very earth was on fire. I looked ahead, but there was no way out. The The tunnel was a dead end. I backed up, my mind racing. Think. There had to be something, anything, I could use to defend myself. But nothing. The walls were bare, and the ground was slick with mud and water, offering no purchase, no hope. I was trapped. And then, I saw it. A flicker of light in the darkness. I turned and saw a narrow opening in the wall, a crack, just big enough for me to slip through. I couldn't think. I couldn't hesitate. I ran toward it. But the fire lizard was faster. It lunged from the shadows, its body moving like liquid flame, too quick to avoid. I felt the heat of its jaws snap just inches from my face, and I screamed, stumbling backward. The air burned as it rushed past me. I had no choice but to dive into the opening, feeling the sharp stone scrape against my skin as I squeezed through. I landed on the other side with a thud, gasping for air, my body trembling from the adrenaline. I was in a small chamber now, some sort of cavern deep underground. The walls were damp, slick with moisture. I couldn't see much in the dark, but I knew the creature was close, far too close. I could hear its growl reverberating through the stone, its footfalls echoing as it moved around the chamber. I pressed myself against the cold wall, praying it wouldn't find me. The temperature in the cavern was rising, the air growing stifling. I couldn't hear anything else now, just the low hiss of the creature's breath and the distant, desperate sound of my own heartbeat. Then it stopped. I held my breath, my body frozen in terror. For a moment, everything was still. The creature was waiting, just out of sight, as though it knew I was there but didn't care. Its hunt had become a game. The seconds dragged on, each one a lifetime. I couldn't stay here. I had to move. I needed to find a way out. I edged along the wall, careful not to make a sound, but every step seemed to echo louder than the last. Suddenly, the creature's growl broke the silence, and I froze. Its eyes gleamed from the darkness, two fiery orbs that burned into me. It had found me. With no more time to think, I turned and ran, desperate, my feet pounding against the wet ground as I heard the creature following. The chase was on, but this time, I wasn't running into the unknown. I was running towards something I hoped would save me. But the creature wasn't far behind. I could hear its growls, its claws scraping against the stone as it gained on me. It was faster than I could ever hope to be. It was inevitable. I was going to die here, in the depths of the earth, trapped by a creature I couldn't understand. And then, as I rounded a corner, I stumbled into an open space. The light from the creature's fiery form illuminated the cavern, and for the briefest moment, I saw it, a sheer drop, a hole in the ground that stretched down into the darkness. I had no choice. I leapt. The fall was dizzying, the air rushing past me, and for one terrifying moment, I thought I was going to lose everything. But then my feet hit the ground with a sickening thud, and I felt myself tumbling, rolling until I hit the cold stone floor below. I had no idea where I was. I had no idea if I would survive. But I was alive. And I was alone. And as the echoes of the creature's growl reverberated in the distance, I knew that whatever happened next, I would never escape the fire lizard's reach. The end was inevitable. I lay there for what felt like an eternity, gasping for air, my body bruised and battered from the fall. The cold stone floor beneath me was a bitter comfort, a reminder that I was still alive, but only just. I could hear nothing now, no growls, no footfalls, no flickering heat. It was as if the world had gone silent. But I knew better. I pushed myself up slowly, pain shooting through my limbs. My fingers brushed against the floor, feeling the cool, rough texture of the stone. My breath still came in quick, shallow gasps. My heart pounded in my chest, deafening in the silence. I couldn't think. My mind was too full of images, the creature's eyes burning like fire, the heat of its pursuit, the fear that had consumed me. The very air still smelled of smoke, and I could feel the weight of the flames pressing down on me, even though the fire itself was no longer there. I stood unsteadily, my body shaking. Where was I? What had happened? How had I gotten here? I couldn't answer any of those questions. I had no idea. I forced myself to move, step by painful step, deeper into the cavern. The darkness seemed to close in around me, suffocating, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't stay where I was. There was no telling if the creature had truly gone, but I couldn't afford to stay and wait. I was already too close to death. The path I followed twisted and turned, an endless maze of narrow passages and vast, hollow chambers. The further I went, the more lost I became. My mind began to unravel, the walls of this place pressing in on me, the darkness stretching out forever. Had I truly escaped? Or was this just another part of its hunt, its territory, another trap to catch me when I least expected it? I stumbled forward, my hands outstretched to find any clue, anything to tell me I wasn't just walking in circles, that I wasn't already dead. But everything was the same, blackness, stone, the occasional drip of water echoing through the tunnels. And then I heard it again. A soft rustling in the distance, a low hiss. I froze, my blood running cold. My mind raced. Was it the creature? Or was it something else? I didn't dare turn to look. The sound of it, faint, almost too quiet, sent a chill through my body. I kept moving. One foot in front of the other, my breath shallow and quick. The rustling continued, echoing off the walls, the sound seeming to come from all directions. But there was no way to know. I was trapped. I wasn't sure how much time passed, whether it was minutes or hours, but the fear remained, gnawing at me, reminding me that no matter how far I went, no matter how deep I ran, there was no escaping this nightmare. The silence returned. The rustling had stopped, but the oppressive weight of the air remained. The deeper I went, the more I felt like the walls were closing in. And then I saw it. A glimmer of light in the distance, faint but unmistakable. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it was there. It wasn't much, but it was something. I had to reach it. I pushed forward, faster now, my feet pounding against the cold stone, each step feeling heavier than the last. I couldn't stop. I couldn't. The light grew brighter the closer I got, a small flicker against the overwhelming darkness. And then, just as I thought I was close to safety, the ground beneath me shifted. I couldn't react in time. My foot slipped, and I felt myself falling once more, this time into an open space. The world spun, and I couldn't catch my breath. I hit the ground hard, pain shooting up through my body, but somehow I managed to stay conscious. I pushed myself up, gasping for air, looking around wildly. The light was gone. I was in a cavern now, a massive open space with high, jagged walls. The air felt different here, cold, almost unnatural, as if I had crossed into some other realm. I didn't know how I'd gotten here, but I knew one thing, the creature wasn't far behind. A low growl echoed through the chamber, the sound reverberating in my bones, and I knew without a doubt that it was there, waiting for me. I had no more strength to run. No more will to fight. I was ready to die. I turned to face the darkness. If the fire lizard was coming for me, I would meet it head on. There was no escape, no way out. And then I saw something, a figure standing in the shadows, tall, looming. It wasn't the creature. It wasn't anything I had seen before. But it was waiting for me. Before I could process what I was seeing, the figure moved, stepping closer, and in that moment, I realized that I had never truly been alone. The cavern seemed to shift around me, the walls narrowing, the space contracting. I felt myself being drawn toward the figure, my body moving of its own accord. And then, everything went black. Cave of Creatures in Tennessee. It was an ordinary day when we set out to explore the caves of Tennessee, a part of the Smoky Mountains I had been hearing about for years. I had heard rumors, of course, spooky whispers among the local townsfolk. People spoke in hushed tones about the strange things that had happened to others who ventured too deep into the caves. Some said they heard eerie, unexplainable noises. Others swore they saw dark shapes flitting in the corners of their eyes. As a seasoned spelunker, I dismissed it all as superstition. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off from the moment we set foot inside the entrance. It was supposed to be a simple expedition, a small group of us, 6 in total, entering the dark labyrinth of tunnels in search of new pathways and undiscovered chambers. I was with my friends, seasoned explorers, all experienced in the art of cave mapping. But something in the air, that strange, heavy stillness, felt different. It was like the cave itself was waiting for us, watching our every move. We had been descending for hours, following the narrow, winding passages deeper into the mountain's heart. The further we went, the less I could shake the feeling of unease crawling under my skin. It wasn't just the darkness pressing in, or the damp smell that grew heavier with each step, it was the silence. We were used to hearing our footsteps echo off the walls or the occasional distant drip of water, but here, there was nothing. No echoes. No sounds at all, except for the faint sound of our breathing. It was like the cave had swallowed up every last trace of noise, leaving only an oppressive quiet. "Did you hear that?" Greg's voice broke the silence, sharp and startled. His flashlight flickered for a moment as he turned toward us. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine, but I didn't respond right away. There was something in the air, something that made my blood run cold, but I couldn't explain why. "I thought I heard something too," Sarah muttered, her face tight with unease. "Like shuffling. A rustling sound." But there was nothing, no wind, no animal noises. Just the hollow quiet of the cave. "Maybe it's just some loose rocks," I said, trying to sound confident, though I could feel the knot in my stomach tightening. I wanted to laugh it off, to convince myself that this was just another normal cave, and we were just being paranoid. But the longer we moved forward, the more I began to doubt myself. There was something there, something unseen, lurking just beyond the edge of our flashlights. Then it happened. A noise, sharp and sudden, a scraping, like claws on stone. It echoed through the tunnel, louder than I expected for something so faint. It was followed by another, and another, getting closer and closer. My heart began to pound in my chest as my eyes frantically scanned the darkness around us. "What the hell is that?" Mark's voice was a mixture of fear and disbelief. I wasn't sure if it was my imagination or not, but I could swear I saw something, just a flicker of movement in the shadows, far ahead. It was so quick, I almost convinced myself it was a trick of the light. But it wasn't. The air grew colder. My breath became visible in the flashlight beam, swirling in the damp air. My thoughts raced as I tried to figure out what was happening. Could it be some kind of animal? A bat colony, maybe? But the sound, it didn't fit. Bats were quiet, fleeting, not like this. And then, the ground beneath us trembled slightly, as though something large and heavy was moving. We all froze. The scraping continued, louder now, followed by the sound of something massive shifting in the dark. I stepped forward, heart racing, trying to steady my breathing. There had to be a rational explanation. Maybe it was an underground stream or a tunnel collapsing. I tried to convince myself that there was no reason to panic until the rustling grew louder and closer. Then it happened. From the corner of my eye, I saw them, large, hulking shapes in the darkness. Shadows that didn't move like shadows. I spun toward them, my pulse hammering in my throat. The figures were too big, too grotesque. They looked like bats, but not any bats I'd ever seen. Their wings, huge and leathery, stretched far wider than any bat I'd encountered in the wild. But they weren't flying. They were crawling, dragging themselves along the floor of the cave, their long, clawed limbs scraping against the stone. My first instinct was to run, to turn and get the hell out of there, but my legs felt like they were made of lead. The fear was overwhelming, gripping me like a vice. Then I heard it again. A sound, soft, whispering, coming from the dark depths of the cave, not far from where the creatures had appeared. Help! The word was faint, barely a whisper, but it was clear enough to send a jolt of terror through my chest. It was a human voice. It sounded like a plea for help, faint and distant. Who else was down here? Before I could think any further, the creatures began to move toward us, their eyes glowing in the beam of our flashlights, two fiery orbs that pierced through the darkness. The air thickened with the oppressive sense of danger. The scent of decay filled the cavern. And then, as quickly as they appeared, they vanished. The rustling stopped. The shadows receded. The tunnel was silent once more. But it wasn't the silence of before. This silence was suffocating. The darkness felt alive, pressing on us from all sides. I turned to face my group, and that's when I realized half of them were gone. There were 5 of us now. And that was just the beginning. I couldn't quite grasp what had just happened. One moment, we were 6, standing at the brink of something terrifying, and the next, half of us had vanished. The cave had swallowed them whole, and they left no trace behind. I should have screamed, I should have done something, but my mouth felt dry, and my legs felt like jelly. The only thing I could hear was my own heartbeat, drumming loud in my ears. We had all turned to look at the spot where the creatures had appeared, where their glowing eyes had burned through the darkness, but it was as if they had never been there. The ground was still, the cave air thick with tension. "Where's Greg?" Sarah's voice trembled, barely a whisper. Her flashlight flickered erratically as she scanned the space around us, her breath shallow and quick. "Mark? Jason?" I called out, my voice weak, betraying the panic that clawed at me. But there was no answer. The tunnel was eerily quiet, as if the very walls were holding their breath, waiting for something. My eyes darted around, searching for any sign of our missing friends. But it was no use. I swallowed hard and forced myself to breathe. "We need to go back." "Get to the entrance," I said, though the words felt hollow. There was no way we could turn back now, not with the creatures out there, not with whatever had happened to Greg and the others. My mind raced, searching for any kind of explanation. Maybe they'd gotten scared, run off deeper into the cave, or maybe they'd been taken. I tried not to think about that last possibility. Sarah hesitated, looking over her shoulder at the darkness behind us. The cave seemed to stretch endlessly, as if the entrance had been swallowed up by the mountain itself. She shook her head. "It's too dark. We'll get lost. We have to keep moving forward. Maybe we'll find them." I didn't agree. Every fiber of my being screamed to leave, but Sarah was right about one thing: the tunnel ahead was the only way out. I could feel the cold air growing heavier, like the cave was alive, suffocating us with its ancient breath. "Okay," I muttered, trying to sound firm. "But if we find anything at all, we leave. No hesitation. Got it?" She nodded, her face pale, but her eyes filled with determination. We moved on, our footsteps slow and deliberate, the echo of each footfall bouncing off the walls. But that oppressive silence still clung to the air, making it hard to focus on anything but the fear gnawing at my insides. As we walked, the temperature dropped even further, and I noticed something I hadn't before. The walls of the cave were slick with moisture, but not just from the typical underground humidity. It felt wrong, almost greasy, like something was bleeding from the rock itself. A chill crept down my spine. "Do you feel that?" I asked, trying to break the silence. Sarah didn't answer right away. Then, her eyes widened in horror as she reached out, gripping my arm with a vice-like grip. "Did you hear that?" I froze, my heart slamming against my ribs. There it was again, scraping, rustling, just like before. But now, it was louder. The sound was no longer in the distance, it was close. Too close. "Run!" I yelled, panic surging through me. But before we could react, something shifted in the darkness ahead of us. A shape. Large and fluid, moving with an unnatural grace. It was just a shadow at first, something I couldn't quite place, but it was there. Then, a figure took form. A creature, larger than any bat I had ever seen, its wings outstretched, claws scraping the stone. It let out a low, guttural sound that vibrated in my chest. Sarah screamed, and I grabbed her wrist, yanking her backward. "Go!" I shouted, pulling her toward the narrow passage we had passed earlier. We sprinted, our flashlights shaking as we ran, casting erratic beams of light on the walls. But every time we turned a corner, the creatures seemed to be right behind us, as though they were tracking our every move. The scraping sound was constant now, not coming from one direction, but from everywhere. They were all around us. We couldn't see them, but we could feel them. "We're trapped," Sarah gasped, her voice breaking with fear. I didn't want to believe it. I couldn't. There had to be another way out, another path. I had to find it. We stumbled into a wide chamber, the walls jagged and uneven, the ceiling high and cavernous. It was the only place we had seen so far that felt slightly less suffocating, but even here, the air was thick and oppressive. Then, there was another sound. A low, wheezing noise, like a dying breath. It came from the far side of the chamber. The flashlight flickered as I swung it toward the noise. And there it was. One of the creatures, its massive wings folded against its body, stood motionless against the rock wall. Its eyes gleamed in the dim light, two red dots that seemed to pierce the darkness. The creature's chest rose and fell in slow, deliberate breaths, and its claws twitched as if waiting for something. Before I could react, I heard a voice, a whisper, so faint that I wasn't sure if I was imagining it. "Help!" It wasn't Sarah. My heart raced, my pulse thumping in my ears. I tried to step closer, but the creature stirred, its eyes following my every movement, its mouth opening to reveal sharp, jagged teeth. It was waiting for me to come closer. It wanted me to come closer. I turned to Sarah, fear written across her face. We have to get out of here. Now. But as I looked back, the creature's figure began to blur, fading into the shadows, melting into the very walls of the cave. And that's when I understood. We weren't just being hunted. We were part of the hunt. We didn't waste a second. We turned and ran, fear giving our legs the strength they needed to move faster than I thought possible. The tunnel ahead seemed to stretch endlessly, and every corner we turned revealed more shadows, more strange shapes lurking just out of reach of our flickering flashlights. The creatures were out there. I knew it. They were watching, waiting for us to make a mistake. My breath was ragged in my chest, my lungs burning with each step. I kept my eyes on the dim path ahead, knowing that if I looked back, I would lose myself to the terror that was chasing us. But even though I dared not look, I could feel them closing in, their presence like a thick, suffocating fog. "Sarah, hurry!" I shouted, my voice hoarse with panic. She was a few steps behind, struggling to keep pace. I could hear her labored breathing, the sound of her footsteps faltering as the darkness pressed in around us. It felt like the walls were closing in, as though the cave itself were alive and hungry. Then, I heard something that made my heart stop. A sound. Not the scraping of claws or the flapping of wings, but a voice. It was faint, barely audible over the pounding of my heart, but unmistakable. A whisper, soft and chilling, slipping through the air like smoke. "Don't run." I froze, the words hanging in the air like a curse. My mind raced. Who said that? Was it one of the creatures? Or was it one of us, lost to the madness of the cave? Sarah didn't stop. She didn't hesitate. She pushed past me, her face white with fear, her eyes wide and frantic. "We need to go. Don't stop." But I couldn't move. I couldn't think. The whispering continued, softer now, almost coaxing. It was as if the cave was speaking to us, pulling us in deeper, promising something if we just let go. I shook my head, trying to clear the fog that had begun to cloud my thoughts. "No, we need to." Another sound. A faint rustle in the dark, a movement so subtle, I almost missed it. But then I saw them, two glowing eyes, peering from the shadows. And then another pair. And another. I felt my stomach twist as the realization hit me. They were surrounding us. There was no escape. We had fallen right into their trap. "Sarah!" I screamed, but the words caught in my throat. The creatures were too close now, their massive wings beating against the air, sending gusts of cold, stale wind my way. Their eyes gleamed with an unnatural hunger, their mouths opening wider, showing rows of teeth sharper than anything I could have imagined. We were too slow. The creatures were faster than us, faster than anything human. They moved with an eerie silence, their wings cutting through the air with a terrifying grace, their claws scraping against the rock. In a panic, I grabbed Sarah's arm and pulled her toward the nearest tunnel, desperate for any kind of exit. But as we stumbled into the new passage, the air changed. It felt colder, the walls more oppressive, pressing in on us like a vice. The shadows seemed to grow thicker, darker. And then I heard it. The sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate steps that echoed off the walls like the ticking of a clock. I couldn't see them, but I could feel their presence. They were coming for us. Don't let them catch us, I whispered, my voice shaking. We need to keep moving. Don't stop. But Sarah had stopped. She was looking down at something on the ground. Her face trained of color. I followed her gaze, and that's when I saw it. A trail of blood. Not fresh, but old, caked into the stone, leading down the passage. It was thick, congealed, as if something had dragged its way through the cave, leaving behind a dark, twisted mark. Whose blood is this? Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. I swallowed, my throat dry. It doesn't matter. We need to keep moving. But my words were hollow. I knew deep down that whatever had left the trail had to be far worse than the creatures chasing us. Something more ancient, more dangerous, had claimed this cave as its own. And it wasn't just hunting us anymore. It was feeding. We took a step forward, but the air grew heavier. The walls seemed to press in closer, the shadows reaching for us. And then, just as I thought we couldn't take another step, I heard it again. That voice. That whisper. But this time, it was clearer. Stronger. Come closer. I whipped around, my heart pounding in my chest, but there was nothing there. Just the darkness. I could feel it now, something watching us, something waiting. I could hear Sarah's breath coming in sharp, panicked gasps. I don't think we're alone, she whispered. I shook my head, trying to steady my thoughts. No, we're not alone. I didn't want to believe it, but the truth was inescapable. There were things in this cave, things that weren't supposed to exist. And we were at their mercy now. We had crossed a line. And now, there was no turning back. The whispering continued, as if the cave itself were alive, calling to us, beckoning us deeper into the unknown. Each step felt heavier, the air thicker with dread. Every shadow seemed to stretch and shift, making it impossible to discern where the walls ended and the darkness began. I could feel it, something ancient and malevolent, crawling just beyond the edges of my vision, circling us like a predator waiting to strike. We kept moving, even though every fiber of my being screamed at me to stop. Sarah was beside me, her steps unsure, her breath quick and shallow. I could hear her muttering something under her breath, a prayer, or maybe just the desperate words of a person trying to hold on to their sanity. Keep going, I urged, my voice hoarse, barely more than a whisper. We can't stop now. But even as I said it, I wasn't sure if it was the right thing to do. There was something about the darkness that felt alive, pressing on us, suffocating us. Every now and then, I would catch a glimpse of those glowing eyes, too many to count, lurking in the shadows, watching, waiting. They never came any closer, but the feeling of being surrounded was unmistakable. I glanced over at Sarah, her face pale, her eyes wide with terror. She was shaking, her hands trembling at her sides. I knew she could feel it too, the weight of the cave, the sense of being trapped in something that wasn't quite natural. The whispering grew louder, more insistent. It seemed to come from all around us now, echoing off the walls, reverberating in my skull. The words were unintelligible, but the tone was clear. It was a lure, a siren song meant to lead us deeper, further into the heart of the cave. Sarah, do you hear that? I asked, my voice barely a breath. She didn't answer immediately. She was looking ahead, her eyes fixed on something I couldn't see. I followed her gaze, and for a moment, I thought I saw something moving in the darkness. A shape, large and undulating, like a shadow that shouldn't exist. And then it was gone. I hear it, Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "It's getting louder. We have to leave." Her words echoed the thoughts I had been trying to deny. We needed to get out. Now. But as we turned to retrace our steps, I heard it, louder than before, a screeching sound, sharp and shrill, coming from deep within the tunnel. The walls around us seemed to reverberate with the sound, and I felt my heart race in panic. Something was coming. We ran, no longer concerned with being quiet or trying to make sense of what was happening. The darkness pressed in on all sides, the tunnel narrowing with every step. I could feel the cold air biting at my skin, the smell of earth and decay thick in my nostrils. Behind us, I could hear the screeching growing louder, closer, the sound of something enormous dragging itself along the stone floor. We weren't just being followed anymore. The creatures were coming for us, and they were faster than I could have ever imagined. I glanced over at Sarah, and in that moment, I saw the terror in her eyes, eyes that had once been full of hope, now consumed by fear. We were no longer explorers. We were prey. "Run!" I shouted, my voice breaking, but Sarah was already ahead of me, her legs moving in desperation. I had to keep up. I had to survive. The tunnel twisted and turned, and soon I lost track of where we were, the light from our flashlights barely cutting through the overwhelming blackness. The shadows seemed to shift, warp, and stretch, and for a moment, I thought I saw figures moving in the periphery of my vision. But when I turned to look, they were gone. The screeching was closer now. Closer than it had ever been. I dared not look behind me. I couldn't. If I did, I might lose what little courage I had left. Suddenly, the ground beneath me gave way. I stumbled forward, my foot slipping, and before I knew it, I was falling, tumbling into the black abyss below. My body crashed against the stone, and for a moment, everything went black. I opened my eyes, disoriented, my head spinning. My body ached with pain. I was lying on cold, hard stone, unable to see anything beyond the faint glow of the flashlight still clenched in my hand. But there was no sound, no screeching, no whispering, no movement. For a moment, I thought I had imagined it all. Maybe I had fallen into some kind of unconscious stupor, and the creatures, the whispers, everything was just a figment of my mind. But then I heard it. A slow, deliberate step. I froze, my blood running cold. Something was here with me. It wasn't Sarah, she had been ahead of me. I slowly turned my head, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, but there was nothing. I heard another step, this time closer. And then I saw it. A figure, standing in the shadows, just at the edge of the beam. Its eyes glowed, green, yellow, red, and they were watching me, unblinking, full of malice. I couldn't breathe. And then, the ground beneath me started to tremble. The ground beneath me quaked, a low rumble that seemed to come from deep within the earth. The tremor ran through my bones, making me feel like I was going to collapse, even though I was already lying on the cold stone floor. The eyes that glowed in the shadows didn't blink, didn't move, but their intensity, like a predator's, was unmistakable. I tried to push myself up, but my arms were weak, my muscles screaming in protest. The pain from the fall was sharp, but it was nothing compared to the terror flooding my mind. I couldn't see much more than the faint light from my flashlight, but I knew something was out there, waiting. Another step. Closer this time. I turned my head, trying to locate the source of the sound, but all I could see was the endless stretch of darkness. The air was thick, as if the very cave itself was holding its breath, and the silence was suffocating. The faint light from the flashlight flickered, casting long, jittery shadows that seemed to sway with a life of their own. My heart raced, each beat sending a painful thud through my chest. And then, just as quickly as the tremor had started, the ground stilled. For a moment, there was nothing, no sound, no movement, just the stillness that settled over the cave like a blanket. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. That something was watching me, waiting for the right moment to strike. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my breathing, but the fear clawed at my throat, choking me. I didn't know what to do, what to think. My mind raced through every possible explanation, but nothing made sense. Is this real? I thought. Are these creatures real? A whisper of movement in the darkness behind me snapped me out of my thoughts. My head whipped around, but there was nothing. No sound. No shadow. Just the oppressive silence, like the cave itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Keep calm. Keep calm, I told myself. But I could hear my own voice in my head, growing weaker with every passing second. And then, a noise. Not a footstep. Not the screeching that had haunted us before. This was different. A faint rustling, like dry leaves moving across the floor. I slowly lifted the flashlight, the beam trembling in my hand, and pointed it toward the sound. And that's when I saw it. A figure, just barely visible in the dim light, an outline, more shadow than substance. It stood tall, taller than any person should be, its body hunched and massive. Its limbs were long, too long, and its hands, if you could even call them that, ended in claws that scraped the stone as it moved. The creature's body was thin, almost emaciated, but its eyes were what held me in place, glowing, piercing, unblinking. I tried to move, to run, but my body refused to obey. Every muscle screamed in agony, and my legs were like jelly, incapable of supporting me. I could only watch as the creature took another step forward. It wasn't just the size that terrified me, it was the intensity of its gaze. It wasn't just curious. It wasn't just hungry. It was predatory. And I was its prey. For a moment, I thought about Sarah. Was she still alive? Was she still out there? Was she trapped like me, or had she managed to escape? I couldn't think about that now. I had to focus on surviving. But how? How could I escape this thing, this creature that seemed to have no limits, no fear? The creature tilted its head, as if studying me, its glowing eyes narrowing. It made a low, guttural sound that rumbled through the cave, a sound so deep and chilling that it felt like it was vibrating in my chest. I instinctively backed away, my hands scraping against the cold stone floor as I tried to push myself up, but the creature was faster. In the blink of an eye, it was upon me. The claws scraped across the ground, coming toward me with terrifying speed. I gasped, my breath catching in my throat. My flashlight fell from my hand, casting a fleeting beam of light on the creature's twisted, grotesque form. Its face was barely visible, shrouded in shadow, but I could make out the glint of sharp teeth that protruded from its mouth, teeth that looked like they could tear through flesh in an instant. I had no time to think. I had no time to run. I only had time to react. My body surged with adrenaline as I scrambled backward, instinct overriding my fear. My hands found a jagged rock, and without thinking, I swung it at the creature's face, hoping to drive it back. For a brief moment, I thought I had struck it. The creature recoiled, hissing in anger, but then it lunged, faster than I could react. Everything went black. When I opened my eyes again, the world around me was silent. The screeching, the whispers, the growling, gone. The cave was empty. Still, I was alive. But I had no idea how. The pain was unbearable, my body bruised and battered from the fall, but I managed to stand, using the walls for support. I didn't know where the creature had gone, or if it was still out there, waiting for me. But one thing was certain, I had to leave. I had to get out of this cave. With every ounce of strength I had left, I pushed forward, stumbling through the darkness, following the faintest flicker of light ahead. The tunnel seemed endless, the walls closing in on me with every step, but I kept moving, driven by the instinct to survive. Finally, after what felt like hours, I saw it, an opening in the distance. Light. The entrance. The world outside. But as I approached, I felt it again, the presence. That terrible, suffocating feeling. The sense that I wasn't alone. I turned, and there it was. The creature. Watching me. Waiting. And this time, I knew there would be no escape. The mushroom forest in West Virginia. Have you ever heard of the forest in West Virginia, where the trees are not the only thing that grows tall? A forest where the mushrooms tower above you, some as big as your head, others as large as a house? The locals call it the mushroom forest, but it's not the mushrooms that should scare you. It's what they release. It was supposed to be a simple camping trip. My friend Mark and I had decided to spend the weekend in the mountains. We'd heard rumors about the strange forest, of course, but rumors are just that, stories. Or so I thought. The first sign of trouble came when we reached the edge of the forest. The air was thick, almost heavy, and there was an odd smell. At first, I thought it was just the scent of earth and damp leaves, but there was something else too, something sharp, like burning rubber. I glanced at Mark, who had already pulled out a map to make sure we were on the right trail. "You good?" I asked, hoping to break the silence. Mark nodded, but there was something off about the way his eyes darted around, as if he were trying to avoid something or someone. He cleared his throat and stuffed the map back into his backpack. "Yeah, just a little. We're out here, that's all," he said with a nervous laugh. We pressed on, the path narrowing as we entered the forest. It wasn't long before the mushrooms began to appear. At first, I thought they were just oversized fungi, but as we walked deeper, I started to notice something unusual. They weren't just scattered across the ground, they were everywhere. Some were as tall as trees, their caps looming above us like umbrellas, their gills glowing faintly in the fading light. The deeper we went, the more surreal it became. The forest felt like it was closing in around us. "We should turn back," Mark suggested after a while, his voice shaky. I ignored him. "It's fine. We're just getting started. Besides, I want to see how far this place goes." I wasn't sure what it was about this forest that intrigued me. Maybe it was the size of the mushrooms, or the strange, dreamlike quality to everything around us. Whatever it was, it kept me going, even though my instincts were starting to scream at me to leave. As the evening wore on, the forest grew darker. The air became thick with the scent of decay, and the mushrooms seemed to pulse, releasing a fine mist that drifted lazily through the air. Mark was getting more uneasy with each step, but I couldn't explain why I wasn't feeling the same. There was something intoxicating about the place, a strange pull I couldn't shake. But then, I started hearing things. At first, it was just a whisper, a soft murmur that seemed to come from nowhere, barely audible over the wind. It almost sounded like voices, but distant, as if they were being carried from far away. "Did you hear that?" Mark asked, stopping in his tracks. I glanced around, my heart beginning to race. "It's probably just the wind." But even as I said the words, I wasn't sure I believed them. The whispers seemed to grow louder, clearer, like a chorus of faint voices just out of reach. My breath caught in my throat, and I reached for Mark's shoulder, wanting to tell him to stay close, but I couldn't seem to move. Then I heard it, one word, clear as day. My name. John. I froze, the hair on the back of my neck standing on end. Mark turned to me, his face pale. Did you hear that?" he whispered, his voice cracking. I nodded, the whisper of my name still echoing in my mind. "Yeah." The whispers came again, but this time they were joined by something else. A soft shuffling sound, as if something, or someone, was moving just beyond the reach of our flashlight's beam. I scanned the shadows, my heart hammering in my chest. "Mark, we need to go," I said, my voice strained. But Mark was already backing away, his face full of fear. His eyes darted to the giant mushrooms, and for a moment I thought I saw something moving among them, something that wasn't a mushroom at all. A figure, tall and thin, with glowing eyes. My stomach turned, and I took a step back, but my feet felt like they were stuck to the ground. "Let's just leave," Mark said, his voice frantic. "Now." But as we turned to go, the ground beneath us trembled. A low, rumbling sound filled the air, and the mushrooms seemed to sway, their caps tilting as if something was pushing against them from below. A deep, guttural noise echoed through the trees. My pulse quickened as I realized the sounds weren't coming from the forest. They were coming from beneath our feet. The air thickened, and I felt a strange pressure in my head, like the weight of 1,000 voices pressing in on me. Mark's eyes widened in terror as he looked around, his hands trembling. "John, I think we've..." His words were cut off by a loud crack, like the snapping of a branch, followed by the unmistakable sound of something moving, something huge, something fast. I looked around frantically, but there was nothing visible. Yet the whispers grew louder, the voices blending into a chaotic roar. My vision began to blur, and the world around me started to warp. The mushrooms seemed to stretch and sway in unnatural ways, their caps rippling like water. I felt dizzy, disoriented, as if I were losing my grip on reality. And then, as if the forest itself was alive, the first figure emerged from the shadows. A creature, no, a thing, tall, thin, with eyes that gleamed like fireflies. It stepped forward with terrifying grace, its movements unerringly smooth. And in that moment, I knew the truth. This wasn't just a forest. This was a place where the line between reality and nightmare blurred, and we had crossed into the realm of the unknown. The creature moved closer, its tall frame casting an eerie shadow across the forest floor. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat reverberating through my entire body. Mark had frozen, his eyes locked on the figure, his mouth slightly agape. I could hear his shallow breaths, ragged and quick, as if he was struggling to breathe in the thick, heavy air. Mark, we need to move," I whispered, but my voice sounded distant, as if coming from a different world entirely. I tried to take a step, but my legs felt like lead. The ground beneath us seemed to pulse, and the whispers, those disembodied voices, grew louder until they drowned out everything else. I could no longer tell if they were coming from the forest, the mushrooms, or my own mind. The pressure in my head intensified, and a wave of dizziness washed over me. But the creature, it wasn't the only one. From the shadows behind the first figure, another shape emerged. Then another. And another. I wanted to scream, but no sound left my mouth. I couldn't move, couldn't think. My mind raced, trying to piece together a logical explanation for what I was seeing, but the whispers filled my thoughts, drowning out reason. I glanced at Mark. He was shaking now, his hands trembling as he gripped his flashlight so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. "John, we're not alone," he muttered, his voice barely a whisper. I nodded, though the words felt hollow. We weren't alone, and it was far worse than we could have imagined. The creatures, the tall, slender figures, were surrounding us now. They weren't human, not even close. Their skin was pale and slick, almost translucent, and their eyes burned with an unnatural light, reflecting the dim glow of the mushrooms. Their mouths were thin slits, and they didn't make a sound except for the soft shuffling of their feet. It felt as though the forest itself had come alive, watching us, waiting. I felt something cold and wet against the back of my neck, a sensation like fingers brushing my skin. I spun around, but there was nothing there. Only the mushrooms, towering like silent giants, their caps dripping with a strange, sticky substance. I was suffocating in this place, drowning in the terror that seemed to bleed from the very ground beneath us. But I couldn't let myself succumb to it. I had to fight, had to get out. "Mark," I said, my voice trembling but firm. "We have to keep moving. We need to find a way out of here." Mark nodded frantically, but his eyes were wide with panic. I could see the fear in him, could feel it radiating off him. He didn't need to say anything. We both knew what was at stake. We turned and started running, or at least I tried to. My legs felt like they were moving through thick mud, each step sluggish and heavy. I could feel the creatures behind us, their presence more oppressive than ever. The whispers seemed to follow us, getting closer, but no matter how fast I moved, they always seemed just out of reach. The mushrooms bent and swayed as if alive, the ground beneath us trembling with each step. I tried to push through, to outrun the nightmare that was closing in, but the forest seemed to stretch on forever. The path that had once seemed so clear now twisted and turned in impossible directions, like the very land was trying to keep us there. "John!" Mark screamed. "Where are we?" I turned to answer, but as I did, I saw it. A massive mushroom, its cap glowing faintly, but it wasn't just glowing, it was moving. The cap swelled and contracted, like it was breathing. And in the center of it, I could see eyes, dozens of eyes, blinking in unison. They were watching us. Panic surged through me. We had to get out. Now. But as I turned to look for a way out, something grabbed my ankle. I screamed, my heart leaping into my throat as I was pulled to the ground. My flashlight flew from my hand, crashing into the leaves, and the beam of light flickered, casting shadows that danced like ghosts. I scrambled to free myself, kicking and thrashing, but whatever had grabbed me was strong. The whispers grew louder, the voices twisting into shrill, unintelligible sounds that made my skin crawl. My breath was coming in short gasps, my chest tightening as I struggled to break free. Then, just as I thought I couldn't take it anymore, I saw Mark, his face pale and wide-eyed, his body rigid with fear. He was reaching out to me, but his eyes were fixed on something behind me, something that made his lips tremble. I turned, and in that moment, I saw it. A shadow, a towering figure, cloaked in darkness, standing just behind me. It was taller than the creatures, its outline indistinct, shifting like smoke in the air. The only thing I could see clearly were its eyes, two burning orbs that seemed to pierce through the darkness and straight into my soul. And then the voice came. "Leave this place," it whispered, low and guttural, "or be lost forever." The ground trembled beneath me as I lay there, still struggling to break free from the grip that held my ankle. I tried to scream, but my throat felt dry, tight, as if the air itself was thickening around me. Every breath I took was shallow, forced, like the atmosphere was growing heavier, pressing down on me, making it harder to think, harder to move. Mark's voice broke through the haze of panic. "John, get up. We need to move." But I couldn't. The figure looming above us, its eyes burning like molten fire, was too much. The weight of it was suffocating. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. This wasn't real. This couldn't be real. Yet the voice, deep and raspy, echoed in my head. It wasn't a figment of my imagination. "Leave this place, or be lost forever." I stared at the figure, unable to comprehend its form. It wasn't like the others. Those creatures were grotesque, twisted, but still tangible. This shadow, this presence, it felt like something that didn't belong in our world. It was like it was made from the night itself, existing in the space between what was real and what was not. I felt the grip on my ankle loosen. The pressure was gone, but I couldn't move. My limbs were frozen, my body trapped in the horror of what I was seeing. I glanced at Mark. He was pale, his face drenched with sweat, his eyes wide with terror. He was backing away slowly, every step hesitant, like he was afraid that any sudden movement would trigger something even worse. "John, we need to go." "Now," he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. But my mind wasn't working. The whispers, the voices, they were growing louder, swirling around me like a storm of madness. Each word, each syllable, felt like it was pulling me deeper into the nightmare. I wanted to run, to escape, but my body wouldn't obey. I could only stare at the shadow. The eyes, those eyes, pierced through the darkness like beacons, watching me, reading me, judging me. And then, the voice spoke again, closer this time. It wasn't just in my head anymore. It was as if it was coming from everywhere, from the trees, from the ground, from the very air around us. "Leave, or be forgotten." I felt a sudden surge of terror, an overwhelming need to get away. Without thinking, I forced myself to move, pushing my body to its limits. I scrambled to my feet, my knees weak, my head spinning, but I didn't care. I couldn't stay here. I couldn't look at that thing anymore. I grabbed Mark's arm, pulling him toward me. "Come on," I shouted, my voice cracking. "We need to run." Mark didn't argue. He followed me, stumbling as we both pushed through the dense underbrush, the glowing mushrooms casting their eerie light around us. The forest had turned into a maze, and every direction seemed to lead to more of those creatures, more of those eyes watching us. We ran for what felt like hours, but the forest never seemed to end. The trees closed in, the path twisted, and I could feel the presence of the shadow following us, looming just behind. I didn't dare look back, but the fear gnawed at me, the certainty that we were being hunted. And then, I heard it. A soft rustling sound just behind us, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps, heavy, deliberate, and too close. My heart skipped a beat. Whatever it wasn't trying to be quiet anymore. It was coming for us. Mark's breath came in sharp gasps, his steps faltering. I could feel his panic, his fear as palpable as my own. We can't outrun it. Mark gasped, his voice breaking. I didn't know what to say. My mind raced, trying to find a solution, but there was no way out. No matter how fast we ran, no matter how many turns we took, the forest seemed to stretch endlessly. The creatures, the shadow, it was all closing in. And those whispers, they were everywhere now. The ground beneath us trembled again, harder this time, shaking us to the core. The trees groaned, their branches twisting and bending as if the forest itself was alive, turning against us. And then, as we reached a clearing, I saw it. The towering figure from earlier, standing in the center, blocking our way. Its eyes blazed with that same unnatural fire, and as I looked at it, I felt my sanity slipping away. I could no longer tell what was real and what was a hallucination. The mushrooms, the creatures, the shadow, they were all part of the same nightmare. John, Mark whispered, his voice shaking with pure terror. What do we do? I didn't have an answer. There was nothing we could do. The creature stepped forward, its long limbs moving with an unnatural grace, its eyes never leaving us. I felt an overwhelming urge to fall to my knees, to give in, but I couldn't. Not yet. But it was too late. The creature's form blurred, and suddenly, it was right in front of us. Its face, if you could even call it that, was a mass of shifting shadows, its eyes consuming everything in their path. The air grew cold, and the whispers reached a deafening crescendo. And then, just as I thought my mind would shatter from the weight of it all, the world went black. When I woke, the first thing I noticed was the silence. The constant rustling of the forest, the eerie whispers, the sound of footsteps, it was all gone. For a moment, I thought I had escaped, that it had all been some sort of twisted dream. But as I slowly opened my eyes, I realized the truth. I wasn't in the forest anymore. I was somewhere else. The ground beneath me was soft, almost spongy, and the air smelled damp, thick, and heavy. The last thing I remembered was the creature, its eyes burning into mine, its presence suffocating, and then nothing. I stood up shakily, my legs weak and unsteady beneath me. The world around me was different, unnaturally still, as if time had stopped. I could barely make out the outline of trees, their trunks twisted and gnarled, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. It looked like the forest, but wrong. Everything was darker, deeper, more suffocating. The air felt like it was pressing in from all sides. I looked around desperately, hoping to see Mark, but he was nowhere in sight. Panic surged through me, sharp and cold. Had something happened to him? Had he? Mark. I shouted, my voice echoing unnaturally in the stillness. Mark, where are you? No answer. I tried to move, but my feet felt like they were stuck in place, as if the earth itself was holding me back. My thoughts were clouded, my head spinning. The fear that had been simmering in my chest since the moment I entered the forest was now boiling over, consuming me. Every direction I looked seemed to lead deeper into the darkness. The whispers began again. It was faint at first, just a murmur, a soft rustling sound like the wind. But then it grew louder, more distinct, until the voices were right behind me. I spun around, my heart racing, but there was nothing there. Just the oppressive silence, the trees bending and swaying in a wind that didn't exist. I felt it again, the presence. The shadow. The thing that had been following me. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it, a weight in the air that pressed down on my chest, suffocating me. Leave this place, or be lost forever. The voice wasn't in my head this time. It was real. It was here. I stumbled backward, my mind reeling. The last time I had heard that voice, it had been the thing standing in front of me, its glowing eyes staring me down. But now, it was just a whisper, an insidious presence that seemed to be everywhere. The forest was alive with it, crawling through every branch, every root, every shadow. A rustling sound came from behind me, followed by the unmistakable shuffle of footsteps. They were soft, but they were there, growing louder. I whipped around, searching for the source, but all I could see was the thick darkness of the trees. And then, in the corner of my vision, I saw something. A shadow, moving quickly, darting between the trees. It was too quick, too fluid to be a person, too unnatural. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. Then came another sound. A scratching noise, like claws against stone, followed by the unmistakable sound of gnawing. Something was eating. Something was hungry. I felt the air grow colder, the temperature dropping so fast that my breath became visible, misting in front of me. My pulse quickened. I turned in every direction, scanning the area, but there was nothing except the overwhelming feeling of being watched. "Mark?" I whispered, but there was no reply. I moved forward cautiously, trying to keep my steps quiet, but the rustling continued, growing closer. The sound was so unnatural, too loud, too deliberate. I quickened my pace, heart racing, but my legs were growing heavier with each step. The air around me seemed to thicken, almost as if the forest itself was swallowing me whole. I had to get out of here. I had to find Mark. I didn't know how long I had been trapped in this nightmare, but I couldn't take it anymore. The darkness, the creatures, the whispers, they were closing in. And I was alone. The ground shook again, violently this time, making me stumble. I caught myself just before I fell, but the moment of instability made me realize something. I wasn't alone anymore. There, in the shadows, in the corners of my vision, something moved. Something big. I could hear it now. The scurrying of claws on stone, the clicking sound of teeth grinding together. It was close, too close. I turned just in time to see the thing. It was huge. A monstrous creature with glowing eyes, its body unnaturally long and twisted. Its fur was matted, its skin stretched tight over its frame, its mouth open in a grotesque, hungry snarl. Its eyes gleamed in the darkness, reflecting the faint light from the mushrooms scattered throughout the forest. And then, I saw it, two more shadows, just as large, just as terrifying, moving behind it, closing in. I didn't think. I didn't stop to reason or rationalize. I ran. My feet flew over the ground, each step more desperate than the last. The creatures were chasing me. I could hear them, growing closer with each passing second. Their claws scraped the earth, the sounds of their pursuit sending waves of terror crashing through me. My lungs burned, my legs screamed for relief, but there was no stopping. There was only running. And then, just as I thought I couldn't run any longer, I saw it, the exit. A clearing, bathed in a sickly greenish light, the trees opening up like a doorway, leading into the unknown. I had no choice. I sprinted toward it, my heart pounding in my chest, the creatures just behind me, their growls echoing in the dark. And then I broke through. I fell forward, the sudden drop into the clearing almost sending me sprawling to the ground. My breath came in short, ragged gasps, my body shaking from the adrenaline, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. The sounds of the creatures, Those horrible, otherworldly things were still behind me, closer now, their breaths heavy and wet. My heart pounded so loudly that it drowned out everything else. I stumbled to my feet, eyes darting around in panic. The clearing stretched out before me, a vast, empty space, but something was wrong. There was no sense of safety here, no sense of peace. The light that bathed the space wasn't natural. It pulsed, faint and greenish, casting long, distorted shadows that made the trees around the edge of the clearing seem like looming, jagged figures. I spun around, trying to see where I'd come from, but the forest had already swallowed the path behind me. The mushrooms, those monstrous things, had stopped glowing. It was as if they had vanished altogether. And then I heard it again, the soft shuffle of claws on dirt. It was coming from all sides now, from every corner of the clearing. The creatures had surrounded me. I didn't know how long I had been running or where I was anymore, but I knew one thing: there was no escaping this place. The forest wasn't just some random stretch of wilderness. It was a living thing. It had trapped me here. I could feel their eyes on me, the creatures, their gaze burning through the shadows, following my every movement. They were so close, I could almost feel the weight of their stare on my skin. My throat tightened, panic clawing at me, but I forced myself to breathe. I backed away slowly, my feet sinking into the damp ground, eyes scanning the perimeter. I had to think, had to stay calm. The sounds were getting louder now. There was no way out. And yet, a strange thought nagged at the back of my mind. What if this was all in my head? What if I had never left the forest? A burst of laughter echoed through my mind. It was faint, almost like a whisper, but it was there. A voice I couldn't place. It was Mark's voice, distant and muffled, but it made my blood run cold. Is this real? I closed my eyes, trying to center myself. I had to be rational. This couldn't be real. It couldn't. The forest, the creatures, they had to be some sort of trick, a hallucination from the spores, from the gas that had started it all. I remembered the dizziness, the strange visions, the growing panic when I first entered this place. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. But then I heard something that shattered my fragile attempt at reason. A scream. It was Mark's voice. I recognized it immediately. The terror, the desperation, it pierced through the air, paralyzing me for a moment. I spun around in panic, searching desperately for the source. No, no, no! I ran, blindly, in the direction of the scream, my legs trembling beneath me. The creatures, the shadows, they followed, their pursuit relentless. My mind was a whirl of confusion. Was Mark real? Was he even here? Had he ever been here? Everything I'd seen, everything I heard, it all seemed so surreal. But the scream, that scream sounded too real to ignore. I pushed through the trees, each step heavier than the last, my breath ragged in my chest. The clearing behind me seemed to stretch farther now, the shadows growing deeper, darker. The ground beneath me felt unstable, as though the earth was shifting, like it was trying to swallow me whole. And then I saw him. Mark. He was standing in the middle of the clearing, his back to me, motionless. His posture was stiff, unnatural. I called his name, but he didn't respond. It was as if he couldn't hear me, or worse, like he didn't want to. Mark. I shouted again, this time louder, panic rising in my chest. He didn't move. Didn't flinch. I took a step forward, reaching out, but then I saw it. His eyes, wide, unblinking, were glowing faintly, an unnatural light reflecting off the ground. His mouth opened, but there was no sound. Just the eerie silence, broken only by the rustling of the creatures. Then, without warning, Mark's body jerked. A sharp, grotesque movement. His head twisted unnaturally to one side, and the low growl that followed chilled me to my core. It wasn't Mark anymore. It was something else. Something wrong. And before I could scream, before I could even process what was happening, something dark and twisted shot out from the ground beneath him, a mass of black tendrils, sharp and writhing. They wrapped around his legs, his arms, pulling him into the earth, his body thrashing violently. I saw his face one last time, wide-eyed, filled with fear, as the ground swallowed him whole. The last thing I heard was his voice, echoing in the depths of the forest. Get out, before it's too late. But it was too late. The forest had already claimed him. I turned, heart racing, the creatures closing in on me. My vision blurred with tears, the weight of the loss crashing down on me. Mark was gone. And now, it was my turn. The ground beneath me began to tremble once more. The dark shapes, those twisted horrors, were closing in. And this time, I knew there would be no escape. The last thing I saw was the black tendrils reaching for me. And then, darkness. Shadows of wolves on the plains of South Dakota. I've often wondered what it is that draws people to the vast, empty plains of South Dakota. For some, it's the wide skies, the untouched wilderness stretching endlessly in all directions. For others, it's the peace that comes with solitude. But I, like most of the local herders, know that these open spaces hold more than just the beauty of nature. There's something else out there. Something we don't talk about. I've been out on the plains for most of the day, moving cattle from one grazing spot to another. The sun was starting to set, casting long shadows across the tall grasses. The wind had died down, and the only sound was the occasional bleat of a sheep or the soft rustle of the wind against the prairie. But as the light began to fade, something felt off. A prickling sensation on the back of my neck. A feeling that I wasn't alone. I glanced behind me, the darkening sky casting long, indistinct shapes across the landscape. The cows seemed calm, as usual, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. I told myself it was just the isolation getting to me, but deep down, I knew better. This had happened before. It was the wolves. They'd been seen around these parts for years, shadows in the dusk, silent and watching. At first, people thought it was just a trick of the light or their minds playing games after a long day in the sun. But then the stories began. Stories from past herders, stories of wolves that weren't like any others. Wolves that moved like shadows, silent and swift, with eyes that glowed in the dark, burning bright against the blackness of the night. I shook my head, trying to push the thoughts from my mind. I had work to do. But even as I prodded the cattle forward, my eyes kept darting over my shoulder. There was nothing there. Nothing except the endless grass and the deepening shadows. But then I heard it. The softest shuffle of movement, like the rustle of leaves in the wind, except it wasn't the wind. It was something heavier. Something that shouldn't be there. I turned quickly, expecting to see the dark silhouette of a coyote or a fox, but there was nothing. Just the stillness of the plains stretching out before me. I swallowed, trying to steady my breath. It was just my imagination, I told myself. Nothing more. But then came the unmistakable sound of a low growl, deep, resonating, like the earth itself was rumbling beneath my feet. My heart skipped a beat. The hair on my neck stood on end. Slowly, I turned, scanning the horizon. The shadows were deeper now, stretching farther into the twilight. I could still hear the soft growl, distant but growing louder. My mind raced. I had to get the cattle to safety. I had to move. Fast. I kicked my horse into a trot, urging it forward, hoping to outrun whatever was out there. But even as we picked up speed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was behind me. Following. Watching. The growl was closer now, closer than it had been before. It was no longer a low rumble, but a clear, menacing sound, unmistakable in its intent. I glanced over my shoulder again, this time seeing a shadow, too large, too dark, to be anything natural. I knew it was them. The wolves. The shadowy figures that hunted in silence. I pushed my horse faster, the ground beneath us thudding with each gallop. The growl became more distinct, more threatening. And then, just as I thought I might make it to safety, I saw them. A pair of glowing eyes, watching me from the edge of the trees. They were unmistakable, large, yellow, burning with an unnatural intensity, reflecting the last light of the dying sun. I didn't stop. I couldn't. The wolves were close now, closer than I'd ever been to them before. But this time, it was different. The fear that gripped my chest wasn't just from the idea of wolves chasing me. It was something deeper, something darker. The plains had become a hunting ground, and I was the prey. The sound of hooves pounding the earth was drowned out by the rising growl. It wasn't just one wolf anymore, it was a chorus of them, low and relentless, growing louder with every step. The cold rush of wind against my face felt sharper now, like it carried the scent of something unnatural, something far worse than any storm. My heart raced in my chest as I urged my horse forward, desperately hoping I was heading in the right direction. But even as the ground beneath us blurred, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being herded, that every turn I made, every beat of my horse's hooves, was taking me deeper into their territory. I glanced back again, my eyes scanning the darkening plains. The figures were there, shadows weaving through the long grasses. They were moving faster than any wolf I had ever known, more like the flicker of a nightmare than the slow, cautious pace of a real animal. I could see the faint glimmer of their eyes, eyes that burned like twin lanterns in the dark. And then, just as quickly, the shadows vanished, swallowed by the endless night. But I knew they weren't gone. They were watching. I kicked the horse harder, hoping the animal would carry us to safety, but the terror rising inside me told me it wouldn't be enough. I had seen enough to know that something was wrong here. This wasn't just a pack of wolves hunting for food, these creatures were something else entirely. I had heard the stories, the whispers from other herders, old tales passed down through generations of men and women who had worked these plains before me. The wolves weren't just animals, they were ghosts, phantoms of the land itself, creatures that existed between the realms of the living and the dead. Some said they were the spirits of ancient wolves, twisted by some curse long forgotten. Others claimed they were shadows, beings born from the very darkness of the night. I didn't know what to believe, but I knew what I felt. The air was thick with dread, and I wasn't alone. My horse was tiring, its breath coming in heavy bursts as we raced over the uneven ground. I could feel it beneath me, its muscles straining with every gallop, but even the strongest horse would tire eventually. I could sense it, the wolves were closing in. I had no doubt in my mind. They were waiting for me to make a mistake, to slow down, to falter. And then, as if to confirm my worst fear, I heard it. The unmistakable sound of footsteps, too light to be made by a man, too heavy to be made by any creature that should belong to these plains. The ground vibrated under the force of their movement, and then silence. The silence was worse than the growling. The stillness, the absolute quiet, seemed to stretch on forever. My horse's breathing was the only sound, ragged and frantic, as I pressed my heels into its sides, urging it onward. But the silence clung to me, wrapping itself around my chest like a vice. It was suffocating. And then I saw it. A shadow, darker than the night itself, moving with unnatural grace. It was tall, too tall. The silhouette of a wolf, but not one like any I had ever seen. Its body rippled and shifted, its outline constantly changing, as if it were a mere extension of the darkness. Its eyes shone brightly, reflecting the last light of the sun, glowing like fiery coals, but it wasn't just its eyes that made it terrifying. It was the way it moved, silent and sure, as though it was one with the night. I froze for a split second, my heart slamming into my chest as the figure moved closer. It wasn't just one wolf either. As the shadow passed, more of them emerged, weaving in and out of the darkness, their glowing eyes multiplying like some unholy army. I snapped back to reality, my hands trembling as I gripped the reins tighter. I needed to keep moving, but my mind was clouded by fear. I had to survive. I had to escape. "Keep moving," I whispered under my breath, my voice shaking. The words felt hollow, meaningless. But the wolves were patient. They had all the time in the world. They didn't need to chase me, not yet. No, they were the shadows, the phantoms, and they were playing with me. I could feel it in my bones, the slow, creeping dread that they were toying with me like a predator with its prey. My horse stumbled, its legs giving way for just a moment. I cursed under my breath, desperate to keep control. But the sound, the unmistakable sound of claws scraping against stone, was enough to send a fresh wave of terror through me. I couldn't outrun them. I couldn't hide. I was alone on this vast, empty plain, and I had nowhere to go. I spurred the horse onward, praying that somehow, against all odds, I could make it through the night. But the wolves were relentless. And the dark was only getting darker. The ground was unforgiving, every inch of it now a threat. The hooves of my horse seemed to pound louder in the silence, their echo bouncing off the walls of my mind. I could feel the heat of the wolves' gaze on me, even though I couldn't see them. It was as if the air itself had thickened, pushing against me, forcing me to breathe harder, faster. The sky had turned an unsettling shade of black, the stars barely visible through the heavy cloud cover. I glanced up, half expecting to see them, those glowing eyes, burning through the darkness. But they were still hidden, watching me from just beyond the reach of the firelight in my mind. I could feel their presence, every hair on the back of my neck standing at attention. I had always been a man of logic, a man who prided himself on his ability to make sense of things. But tonight, none of it made sense. The world had twisted around me, warping into something unrecognizable, something primal and terrifying. The shadows no longer felt like an extension of the land, but like a living, breathing force, something ancient, hungry, and filled with malice. There was no moon tonight. Only the unrelenting darkness and the sound of my heart pounding in my chest. My horse stumbled again, its breath now labored, ragged. I could see the strain on its face, the sweat dripping from its sides. It was too much, too fast. And I could feel it, too, the fatigue, the weight of the fear pressing down on me. I had to keep going. I couldn't stop. But then, I heard it. A single, sharp cry that split the silence like a crack of thunder. It wasn't the howl of a wolf. No, this was something else, something more guttural, more inhuman. I whipped around in my saddle, trying to see where the sound had come from. But all I could see was darkness, the world slipping further away from me. The shadows shifted, stretching and pulling like fingers reaching for me. And then, just as quickly as the cry had pierced the night, it was gone. I didn't dare slow down. I couldn't. If I stopped, even for a moment, I knew what would happen. I knew they were waiting for me to slip up, to falter, and that would be my end. But the sound came again. This time, closer. The ground shook beneath me, and I realized with a sickening lurch in my stomach that it wasn't my horse causing the tremor, it was the wolves. They were moving. Fast. Too fast. I had to make it to the cliffs. I had to. If I could just reach the edge of the land where the plains dropped off into the valley below, maybe, just maybe, I could make my escape. I spurred my horse forward, ignoring the fatigue that was beginning to cloud my vision. The shadows flickered in and out of sight behind me, but I knew they were there, just out of reach. My horse's hooves rang out against the ground as we raced through the night, and the chilling sound of a low growl echoed from behind me, sending a jolt of pure terror down my spine. They were getting closer. I could hear their claws scraping against the earth, their breath hot and heavy on the wind. They were closing in. I pushed forward, not daring to look back again. The wind whipped at my face, and my vision blurred. The shadows were no longer just figures in the distance. No, they were real now. Real and dangerous. A flash of movement caught my eye, a shape darting from the edge of the plains into my path. I yanked the reins hard, pulling the horse to the side, just narrowly avoiding the thing that had appeared in front of me. It was a wolf. But it wasn't like the others. This one was larger, its fur dark and matted, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. It stood in front of me for a brief moment, its mouth open, teeth glinting in the dim light, before it vanished into the darkness like the others. I didn't stop. I couldn't. But my heart raced faster now. They were all around me. I could feel it. The cliffs were ahead, just within reach. I had to make it. And then, just as I thought I might escape, the ground beneath me trembled once more, this time with such force that my horse reared up, throwing me from the saddle. I hit the ground hard, my breath knocked out of me as I scrambled to my feet, heart pounding in my chest. My legs felt like lead, and I couldn't catch my breath. I glanced around, searching for my horse. But it was gone. Vanished, like everything else. The growls grew louder, filling the air, vibrating through my bones. I knew they were here. They were everywhere now. I took a step back, my mind racing, looking for some kind of escape. But there was no way out. No way to outrun them anymore. The darkness closed in. I could feel the air shift, thick with tension. The growls had grown louder, now almost a chorus, echoing all around me. The shadows swirled in the corners of my vision, fleeting, ghostly shapes that seemed to move with purpose. I staggered back, my heart hammering against my ribs, my breath shallow and erratic. My legs were unsteady, but I forced them to carry me, every instinct screaming at me to run. But where to? There was nowhere to go. No place to hide. The cliffs were now a mere blur in the distance. The drop into the valley was too far. My eyes darted around, desperately searching for some sort of weapon, something to defend myself with. But there was nothing. Nothing except the empty darkness pressing on me from all sides. I could hear the unmistakable sound of claws dragging along the ground, a sickening scrape that set my nerves on fire. My hands were trembling, my body screaming for flight, but my mind was paralyzed, trapped in a cage of fear. Then, I saw them. The first wolf emerged from the shadows, its massive form moving with a terrifying grace. Its fur was matted and filthy, its eyes glowing a sickly yellow, like twin flames burning in the night. The wolf's lips peeled back in a snarl, revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth, each one gleaming in the dim light. It was enormous, far larger than any wolf I had ever seen, its muscles rippling beneath its thick coat. Behind it, another wolf appeared, then another. The shadows parted, revealing more of them, their eyes burning with hunger. They circled around me, their growls filling the air, vibrating through my bones. My chest tightened as I struggled to breathe. There was no escape now. No way out. I tried to gather my thoughts, to make sense of the madness unfolding before me. These creatures weren't natural. They were wolves, not in the way I understood them. There was something ancient, something unnatural about them, something that made my blood run cold. The air smelled of decay, of death. It was thick with the scent of these creatures, of something older, more sinister. I couldn't focus. My vision blurred. And then, I heard the whisper. It was faint at first, barely a sound at all, but it was there, threading its way into my mind. A voice, soft and insistent, weaving its way through the darkness. Run. The word echoed in my head, a command. My feet moved before I could even think, stumbling forward, away from the wolves, away from the growing nightmare. But they were faster. Always faster. Their growls rose in pitch, a warning, a signal. They were closing in. I turned to face them, forcing my legs to obey, my heart pounding so hard in my chest I thought it might explode. My breath was ragged, panic threatening to tear me apart. And then I realized it, their eyes. The glowing eyes weren't just hunting me. They were controlling me, drawing me in, forcing me to face them. The voice came again, louder this time. Stop running. I froze. The wolves stopped, too. Their glowing eyes locked on mine, their bodies tensing as if preparing to pounce. For a long moment, we stood like that, me, trapped in their gaze, unable to move, unable to think. I could feel them inside my head, pushing against my thoughts, drowning out everything else. The world narrowed to nothing but those eyes. Then, without warning, the largest of them lunged. It was a blur of fur and teeth, a violent, desperate motion. I barely had time to react, instinctively throwing my arms up to shield myself. But it was too late. The wolf's jaws closed around my arm, sharp teeth sinking deep into flesh. The pain was immediate, searing, overwhelming. I screamed, the sound raw and guttural, but it was drowned out by the growl of the wolf as it shook its head, dragging me to the ground. The others joined in, their teeth flashing, their paws striking with brutal force. I could feel the weight of their bodies, the cold touch of death closing in. I kicked, I fought, but my strength was slipping. My body was giving out. But then, in that moment, something inside me snapped. With a final, desperate cry, I twisted my body and reached for the ground beneath me. My fingers brushed something solid, something sharp. A jagged rock. I grabbed it, swinging it with every ounce of strength I had left. The blow landed, hard and true, against the nearest wolf. The creature howled in pain, recoiling, giving me just enough time to scramble to my feet. I didn't think. I didn't hesitate. I ran. I ran as fast as I could, stumbling over the rocky ground, pushing myself beyond what I thought possible. The wolves howled behind me, their voices twisted with rage. But I didn't look back. I couldn't. The cliff's edge was closer now. The fall was inevitable. There was no other way. I reached the precipice, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The wolves were nearly upon me, their breath hot on my neck. The ground beneath me seemed to tremble with their fury. And then I jumped. The world went silent. For a moment, I was weightless, suspended in the air, my body moving faster than my mind could process. The wind whipped past me, cold and sharp, and I felt my heart race in time with the falling. And then, nothing. I hit the ground hard, the world around me spinning. Pain exploded through my body, but I forced myself to move, to crawl, to find shelter. I couldn't stop. Not yet. But even as I scrambled towards safety, I knew the wolves were not gone. They would never be gone. And as I looked over my shoulder, I saw the glint of glowing eyes in the distance, waiting for me to make the next mistake. Waiting for me to fall. My body was aching, bloodied and bruised from the fall. I could feel every bone in my limbs, every scrape and gash as I dragged myself through the underbrush, gasping for breath. But there was no time to stop. There was no time to rest. The wolves were still out there, their presence haunting the edges of my consciousness like a nightmare that never ended. The world around me seemed to warp, the shadows stretching longer, growing darker with each passing moment. I couldn't tell if it was the terror in my mind or the creeping darkness of the forest itself. Every rustling of leaves, every snap of a twig underfoot made my heart leap in my chest. It felt like I was being watched, like something was always just behind me, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I stumbled forward, trying to ignore the agony in my limbs. My hands scraped against the rough bark of the trees as I used them for support, pushing myself onward, deeper into the woods. My mind was a mess of panic and adrenaline, each thought a jumbled mess of survival instincts and terror. And then I heard it. A soft sound at first, barely audible over the pounding of my heart. A whisper. It was low, a voice so faint I almost convinced myself it was just the wind. But no, it was there again, sharper this time, almost like it was speaking directly to me. You can't outrun them. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The voice was coming from all around me, like the wind itself had taken form and was now speaking to me. I spun around, trying to locate the source, but there was nothing. Only the darkness of the forest stretching in every direction. I was losing my mind. I took a step back, my foot slipping on the wet ground, and for a moment, I thought I might fall again. The pain from the earlier fall still lingered, but it was nothing compared to the crushing weight of fear that pressed down on me now. Run. The voice was more insistent now, a command, and without thinking, I turned and began running again. My legs moved on their own, the adrenaline coursing through my veins like a drug. The whisper continued, urging me forward, pushing me deeper into the forest. I didn't know where I was going anymore, didn't care. I just needed to keep moving. But then I heard something else. A low growl, not from behind, but from ahead. A sound so primal, so full of hunger, it froze me in my tracks. My heart skipped a beat. No. They had found me. The ground beneath me seemed to tremble as the first of the wolves stepped into view. Its glowing eyes pierced through the darkness, locking onto mine with a terrible intensity. Its massive form moved silently, its body coiled with power, and I could see the glint of sharp teeth in the faint moonlight. It was the same wolf from before, the one that had almost torn me apart at the cliff. It hadn't gone far. It had been waiting for me. I felt my pulse quicken, the terror rushing back in waves, drowning me. My breath came in short, ragged gasps as I backed away, but the wolf didn't move. It just stood there, its gaze never leaving mine. There is no escape. The whisper, that damn whisper, echoed in my mind. I tried to run, to turn and flee, but my legs wouldn't obey. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I was paralyzed, caught in the wolf's gaze, lost in the glow of its eyes. And then, out of nowhere, there was a sound. A snap. A crack. Another wolf. It appeared from the shadows, its enormous form towering over the underbrush, its eyes glowing with the same eerie light. It was joined by another, and then another, until I was surrounded. The wolves circled me, their growls low and menacing. The whispering voice in my head was drowned out by their snarls, their breath hot against my skin. This is it. I didn't want to accept it, but I knew. I had no more strength to fight. No more to run. The largest of them stepped forward, its eyes never leaving mine. It was like it was toying with me, savoring the moment before the end. The others followed, their movements synchronized, predatory, closing in. I felt my legs buckle beneath me, the weight of despair sinking in. I sank to the ground, trembling, unable to stand, my heart pounding louder than the growls surrounding me. But just as the first wolf lunged, everything went still. The world went silent, the growls fading into an eerie calm. The wolves froze, their eyes wide, their ears twitching. It was as though something had interrupted the nightmare, as though time itself had stopped. And then I saw it. From the shadows of the trees, another figure emerged. At first, it was just a silhouette, barely discernible in the darkness. But as it stepped closer, the shape became clearer. It was tall, unnaturally tall, with long, sinewy limbs and glowing eyes of its own. A creature far more terrifying than the wolves. The wolves recoiled at its presence, their snarls turning into whimpers of fear. The creature's gaze swept across them, and with a single movement, it raised one long, clawed hand. The wolves scattered, vanishing into the night as if they were nothing more than shadows. I could barely comprehend what had just happened. The thing in front of me was something beyond my understanding, something out of nightmares, something ancient. It turned its gaze to me, and I froze, unable to look away. There was no whisper now. No more growls. Only the suffocating presence of something far more dangerous. And then it spoke. You should never have come here. The voice was not a whisper, but a low, rumbling command. My heart skipped, but I couldn't move. The fear was too much, too overwhelming. The last thing I saw before everything went black was its glowing eyes. The Blue Lake in Florida. Have you ever seen water turn blue in the dead of night? Most people would say it's impossible, that the world simply doesn't work that way. But I can tell you, from my own experience, it's real. The Blue Lake in Florida isn't like any other lake. At night, it changes its color, glowing in a deep, unnatural blue. But the water does more than just change color. It does something far darker. It makes you feel things you can't explain. Fear. Cold. A sense that something is watching you, waiting for you. I didn't believe it at first. The stories, the warnings from the locals, people said that anyone who swam there at night would feel something wrong. Some said it was the water itself, others thought it was the spirits of the forest. I wasn't sure what to believe, but I didn't take the stories too seriously. After all, I had spent years exploring abandoned places, swimming in lakes and rivers that were supposed to be dangerous. None of it had ever scared me before. That was until I found myself standing on the edge of the Blue Lake one fateful night, the air still and heavy with humidity. The moon hung low, casting a pale light across the water. I remember how the silence pressed against me, the kind of silence that feels unnatural, like the world is holding its breath. I had heard the whispers, the warnings, but they only made me more curious. It was just a lake, wasn't it? Just a strange phenomenon. People talked about it in hushed tones, like it was a curse. But I didn't believe in curses. Not until that night. I stood there for a long time, staring at the lake. The water looked black, like any other body of water in the dark. But then, just as I was about to turn away, it happened. The water began to change. At first, it was barely noticeable. A faint shimmer, a soft glow. But within moments, the entire surface of the lake turned an eerie, brilliant blue. I could feel my heart rate increase, a shiver running down my spine, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. There was something captivating about it, something that pulled me in. I had to swim in it. I don't know why. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was the feeling that the lake was calling me, as if it wanted me to come closer. So, without another thought, I stripped off my clothes and waded into the water. It felt colder than I expected, the chill sinking deep into my bones, but I pushed on. At first, the water seemed fine. I swam a few strokes, the glow illuminating my skin, casting strange shadows that seemed to dance around me. I felt peaceful, almost hypnotized by the beauty of it. But then, the temperature began to drop. Slowly at first, then rapidly, until I was shivering uncontrollably. It wasn't the kind of cold you get from being in water too long, it was something deeper, something unnatural. It felt like the lake itself was draining the warmth from my body, leaving me cold to the core. I tried to shake it off, thinking it was just my imagination. But then I heard it. A faint sound, like a whisper, barely audible above the gentle lapping of the water. My heart skipped a beat. I stopped swimming, my body frozen in the water. The whisper came again, this time louder, clearer. You should not be here. I spun around, searching the water and the surrounding forest, but there was no one there. Just the blue glow of the lake, stretching out in all directions. My breath quickened, a sense of unease flooding my chest. I couldn't explain it, but I knew something was wrong. I started swimming back toward the shore, my strokes becoming frantic. But with every movement, the water seemed to pull me deeper, as if it didn't want to let me go. My legs were heavy, my body sluggish. The cold was seeping into my very soul, and I could feel my mind starting to unravel. The whisper came again, closer this time, as if it was right behind me. It will never let you leave. I looked over my shoulder, but the water was still and calm, nothing but the endless blue stretching behind me. The voice was in my head, but it felt real, like something was there with me. Panic surged through me. I pushed myself harder, my breath ragged, my limbs burning. but it felt like the water was resisting me, pulling me back, like it had a life of its own. The blue glow flickered, a strange ripple running across the surface, and for a moment I thought I saw something beneath the water. Something large. Something dark. I reached the shore, nearly collapsing as I scrambled onto the muddy bank. My chest heaved with exhaustion, but I didn't stop. I ran, not looking back, my feet slipping in the wet grass as I sprinted toward my car, heart hammering in my chest. But the whispers didn't stop. You can't escape me. I didn't stop running until I was safely inside my car, doors locked, windows rolled up. I stared out at the lake, the glow still visible in the distance. My hands were shaking, my body cold despite the heat of the night. The lake was still. But I knew it wasn't over. That's when I realized something. The lake didn't just want me to swim in it. It wanted something far worse. And it was waiting for me to come back. I tried to forget about the lake. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me, the result of too many late nights and too many beers. But the truth is, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed inside me. A part of me wanted to believe that I could walk away and never think about it again. But deep down, I knew better. The lake had a hold on me, and I could feel its pull even while I was miles away. Days passed, and I went back to my normal routine. But I couldn't shake the unease. I felt watched, like eyes were always on me, following my every move. I'd be walking down the street, and then, for no reason, a cold chill would run through me. I'd glance over my shoulder, half expecting to see something lurking in the shadows. But there was nothing. Just the same normal world. Yet, the fear, the presence, it lingered, just beyond the edge of my mind. It wasn't until that night, a week after I'd swum in the lake, that it happened again. I was lying in bed, trying to sleep, when I heard a noise outside my window. A soft scraping sound, like something or someone was dragging their feet through the dirt. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but the sound grew louder, closer. I held my breath, listening, waiting. My heart beat in my throat, my mind racing to explain it. The window rattled, and I shot up in bed, my heart pounding. I didn't dare look outside. I knew better. But the sounds didn't stop. I could hear something moving around the house, slow, deliberate. My thoughts scrambled. It couldn't be real, could it? There was no one outside. There couldn't be. Then I heard it again. The whisper. Come back. The voice was soft, but I recognized it instantly. The same voice I heard in the lake. It sent ice through my veins, paralyzing me. I wanted to scream, to shout, to demand an explanation for this madness, but I couldn't. My mouth was dry, my limbs frozen. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, as if the lake itself had crawled into my very soul. I jumped out of bed, grabbing my phone to call for help, but the screen flickered and went dark. I tried again, nothing. The lights in the house dimmed, then went out entirely. I stumbled through the darkness, my mind spinning. The whispering voice followed me, soft but constant. You can't escape. I ran out of my room and into the hall. The air felt thick, oppressive, and the floorboards creaked underfoot as I moved through the house. Every corner seemed to hide something, a shadow lurking, watching. I felt it, felt the eyes on me, the weight of something invisible pressing down on me. I grabbed the door handle to the outside and yanked it open. But as I stepped outside, the night air hit me like a wall, sharp and cold. My breath misted in the air, and I could see the faint glow of the lake in the distance, its blue light flickering like some distant, malevolent star. I turned to look back at the house, half expecting to see something there, something from the lake, but there was nothing. Nothing but the silence and the darkness. But the fear was still with me. It was in my chest, crawling up my throat. The next morning, I drove out to the lake again. I couldn't stop myself. I needed to understand it, to face whatever was happening to me. Maybe if I confronted it, it would go away. Maybe the lake wasn't as dangerous as everyone said. Maybe I had just imagined the whole thing. But as I arrived, the sight of the lake made my stomach twist. It was just as it had been before, calm, beautiful, peaceful during the day. The sun shimmered off the water, and I could almost pretend that nothing was wrong. Almost. I parked my car and walked down to the water's edge, my mind racing. What was it about this place? What was it about me that had drawn the lake's attention? I stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do, when I heard it again. The whisper. Louder this time. You shouldn't be here. I froze. The words weren't just in my head, they were in the air, like a breath, soft and chilling. I spun around, expecting to see someone there. But again, there was no one. Just the empty woods and the still lake. But the water, it was changing again. Slowly at first, just like the night I swam in it. The blue glow spread across the surface, like something beneath was reaching up to meet the sky. I didn't swim this time. But as I watched, a wave of dread washed over me. Something wasn't right. Something was waiting. I should have turned and run. I should have listened to the voice that had warned me, the same one that had whispered my name in the dead of night. But there was something in me, a strange compulsion, pulling me forward. It wasn't just the lake anymore. It was something else, something deeper. And I had to know what it was. I took a hesitant step closer to the water. The air around me grew heavier, thicker. The breeze that had been rustling the trees moments ago seemed to fade away, leaving only a suffocating stillness. The water was still, almost unnaturally so, reflecting the clear sky like a mirror. But then, I saw it. A ripple. It wasn't from the wind. No, this came from something below, something deep. The ripple spread across the surface, but it wasn't like a normal wave, it was more like the lake itself was shifting, moving with purpose, as if alive. The blue light deepened, swirling in intricate patterns beneath the surface, pulsing with an eerie rhythm. Come closer. The voice again, this time louder, clearer. My heart hammered in my chest. My legs felt heavy, as if the ground itself was holding me in place. I wanted to run, to get away from this strange, terrifying force, but I couldn't. My body refused to obey. I stepped forward, the ground squelching beneath my feet as I sank deeper into the soft earth. My breath quickened, my mind a blur of conflicting thoughts. Was I losing my mind? Was this real, or was I just imagining it? But there was no denying the pull, the weight of something ancient and powerful in the air, pushing me toward the water. I reached out, my fingers brushing the cool surface. For a split second, everything was still. The whispers, the strange glow, the oppressive silence, it all disappeared, as if the lake itself was holding its breath. Then, the water shifted violently. Something large surged beneath the surface, sending waves crashing toward the shore. I stumbled backward, slipping on the mud, my heart racing. The glow beneath the water grew brighter, more intense. And then I saw it. A shape, something massive, dark and coiled. It moved like a serpent, its form twisting and undulating in the depths of the lake. But it wasn't just the shape that terrified me, it was the eyes. Two glowing, yellow eyes stared at me from the depths. They were unmoving, fixed on me, as if studying me, as if waiting. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. I couldn't look away. Those eyes were like nothing I'd ever seen, more intelligent, more aware than any animal's. They burned with an unnatural hunger. The ground beneath me trembled, and I felt a force, like an invisible hand, pull me closer to the water. I tried to step back, but my legs refused to move. The eyes didn't blink. They didn't look away. "You belong here." The voice was louder now, almost deafening. It filled my mind, my very soul, until I thought I might shatter from the pressure. The water rippled again, but this time it wasn't the surface that shifted, it was something underneath, something far larger, rising from the depths. I heard a splash, and then the unmistakable sound of something large moving through the water. I turned my head, but it was too late. A massive shape shot up from the lake with an explosive force, sending water spraying into the air. I barely had time to scream before it was upon me. It wasn't just a creature. It was an entity, something ancient, something all beyond comprehension. It had no shape, no form that I could describe. It was a mass of writhing limbs, scales, and endless shadows, an unnatural fusion of water and terror. The eyes were everywhere, watching me, drawing me in. I could feel the cold breath of the thing on my skin as it loomed above me, and in that moment, I realized what it was. It was the lake. It was the water itself, alive, hungry, and it had been waiting for me. The force of its presence knocked me backward, and I tumbled into the water. The cold was unbearable, seeping into my bones, but the worst part was the weight. I couldn't move. It was as if the water itself had become an anchor, pulling me deeper, dragging me toward the bottom. I fought, I struggled, but it was useless. The lake was stronger than I was. Its grip was relentless, and the water grew colder with every passing second. I could feel the darkness closing in around me, swallowing everything. And then, just as I thought I would lose consciousness, a final thought cut through the terror. "You will never leave." The voice echoed in my mind as the world around me went black. I don't know how long I was underwater. Time didn't exist in that place. There was only the crushing weight of the water, the freezing cold that numbed my limbs, and the sensation of sinking deeper, farther into the void. My chest burned, my lungs screamed for air, but I couldn't move, couldn't fight back. It was as if the water itself had a hold on me, and no matter how hard I struggled, I was bound by an invisible force. I thought I was going to drown. I thought I was going to die there, in the darkness, alone. But then, just as my vision began to fade and my mind started to slip away, I felt it, something different. A sudden rush of warmth, like a hand pulling me out of the cold grip of the water. The darkness receded, and I gasped for air, feeling the strange pressure on my chest lift. My eyes snapped open, and I found myself lying on solid ground. I wasn't in the lake anymore. I was on the shore, the soft grass beneath me cool and damp. My heart raced in my chest, my body trembling from the shock of what I had just experienced. I sat up slowly, gasping for breath, my mind spinning, struggling to make sense of what had happened. Had I been pulled from the water? Had someone saved me? I looked around frantically, but there was no one. No sign of any living being at all. I was alone. But I wasn't alone. A chill ran down my spine as I realized the truth. The lake, the water, the thing beneath it, it wasn't gone. It was still there, waiting. I could feel it. The air was heavy, thick with a presence that made my skin crawl. It was like the lake itself had followed me, dragged me back to this place. I could feel the pull, the weight of it, in every breath I took. The water wasn't just physical, it had infiltrated my mind. You can never leave. The voice was soft, but unmistakable. It echoed in the back of my mind, cold and distant, as if it had always been there, buried deep within me. My pulse quickened as I looked around, my eyes scanning the darkened woods. Nothing seemed out of place, but everything felt wrong. The trees, the wind, even the very air, it was as if the world itself was shifting, bending in ways I couldn't understand. I stood shakily, my knees weak beneath me. I had to get out of here. I had to leave. But there was nowhere to go. The road was miles away, and the lake, it was still there, lurking at the edge of the woods. Watching. Waiting. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding in my chest, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. The ground beneath me shifted, the earth suddenly unstable. I lost my footing, and before I could stop myself, I was falling again, falling into the darkness. But this time, there was no lake. There was no water. There was only the void. I tumbled through an endless blackness, and in that moment, I realized something horrifying. I wasn't just falling through space, I was falling through time. The world around me blurred, distorted, twisting like a warped reflection in a cracked mirror. I saw flashes, glimpses of things I couldn't comprehend, the lake, the water, the eyes, the voice. Each moment was a jagged piece of reality, disconnected and out of place. I screamed, but my voice was swallowed by the darkness. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, everything stopped. I was on the ground again, the coldness of the earth pressing against my skin. My heart thudded in my chest as I pushed myself up, my hands shaking. I couldn't make sense of what was happening. Was I trapped? Was I still in the lake, lost in its depths? I looked around, and this time, I saw it, something moving in the shadows. At first, it was just a flicker of movement, too quick to catch, but then it grew more distinct. A shape, tall and thin, standing at the edge of the trees, watching me. Its outline was vague, almost translucent, but there was no mistaking it. It was real. It was here. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The figure didn't move, but I could feel its presence, as if it were reaching out to me, pulling me into its dark embrace. The voice returned, this time clearer, more insistent. You belong to the lake now. I tried to stand, to run, but my legs refused to move. I was paralyzed, trapped in the grip of whatever force had taken hold of me. The figure stepped forward, its form becoming more solid, more defined. Its eyes were glowing, those same yellow eyes I had seen beneath the water, the eyes that had watched me, studied me. I could hear its footsteps now, slow and deliberate, like a predator closing in on its prey. Each step was a rhythmic thud, a steady drumbeat that echoed in the silence of the woods. My pulse raced, and I tried to scream, but no sound came. It's time to join us. I couldn't fight it anymore. The darkness, the lake, the figure, it was all too much. The fear, the uncertainty, the terror, it consumed me, swallowed me whole. And in that final moment, as the figure reached out for me, I realized one horrifying truth. I had already been claimed. The lake had won. The figure's hand reached out, its fingers long and gnarled like roots twisted by age, stretching toward me with an unnatural speed. My heart pounded so violently I thought it might break free from my chest. I tried to move, to escape, but my body wouldn't obey. The air around me thickened, closing in like the walls of a tomb. You can't run. You can't hide. The voice was clearer now, louder. It wasn't just in my head, it was all around me, vibrating through the air, through my very bones. I could feel it, like the pulse of the earth itself, deep and ancient. The figure's eyes burned, bright as lanterns in the night, their glow cutting through the darkness. I couldn't look away. I couldn't breathe. The hand was inches from me now, its cold touch like death itself. I braced myself for the inevitable, for the moment when I would be pulled into that abyss, when I would become one with the lake. But then, everything stopped. The figure froze, its hand hovering in midair. The forest, the night, the world itself seemed to hold its breath. I strained to hear any sound, but there was nothing. No rustling leaves, no wind, no movement. Only silence. An oppressive, suffocating silence that weighed down on me, pushing the air from my lungs. And then, slowly, the figure stepped back, its eyes narrowing as if contemplating something far beyond my understanding. A terrible realization struck me. This wasn't the end. This was something else. The lake wasn't done with me yet. I could feel it, like a weight pressing on my chest. The lake had never been about the water. It wasn't about the lake at all. The water, the creatures, the voices, they were just manifestations. The lake was something deeper, something far more ancient. It had claimed me in ways I couldn't even comprehend. The ground beneath me trembled. I stumbled backward, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The forest, the world around me, began to change. The trees were no longer just trees. Their branches twisted, their trunks warped as if the very land was alive, breathing, shifting under my feet. The figure turned away then, moving back toward the shadows from where it had come. I watched, dazed, as it disappeared into the darkness, its form dissolving like smoke in the air. And for a moment, I thought maybe it was over. Maybe I was free. But deep down, I knew better. I wasn't free. Not really. The ground continued to shake beneath me, the earth splitting open, and from the chasm that formed, a faint, horrible sound reached my ears. It was soft at first, just a low, wet slithering. But then, as if something was stirring from a long, deep sleep, it grew louder, sharper. And then I saw it. A massive shape rising from the earth, a creature, half buried in the ground, with eyes that glowed like molten gold, its body shifting and writhing at unnatural angles. It was monstrous, a thing that shouldn't exist in this world. Its very presence radiated power, hunger. The lake. The lake had been more than just a body of water. It had been waiting, dormant, until it found a way to reach out, to manifest in this world through me. Through everyone it had claimed. I turned to run, but it was too late. The creature moved faster than anything should be able to, its body undulating and expanding in ways that defied logic. It was no longer just a figure. It was the lake, the essence of the thing beneath the water, the thing that had followed me, that had always been with me. I felt the ground give way beneath me once more, and I fell into the yawning darkness. The last thing I saw before everything went black were those glowing eyes. They were everywhere, piercing through me, drowning me in their light. And then, nothing. When I woke, I wasn't alone. I was in the water again. My body was in the water. I couldn't move, couldn't feel my limbs. The world was silent, but I could hear it now, soft whispers, distant and incomprehensible, coming from the depths. I felt the pull, the cold grasp of the lake, and it was as if I had always been here. This was where I belonged. There was no escape. The water wasn't just water. It was the soul of something older, something that had always been there, waiting, watching, whispering. And now, I was part of it. The lake had one, and there would be no end. Foggy Hill in Kentucky. It started with a strange feeling, a weight in the air that I couldn't explain. I've lived in Kentucky all my life, and I knew the hills around here like the back of my hand. But there was something different this time, something that sent a shiver down my spine as I drove up the winding road to the top of the hill. The morning had been clear, the sky bright with the kind of autumn chill that makes the leaves turn crisp. But as I climbed higher, I noticed it, the fog. It wasn't the usual low-lying mist that comes and goes with the seasons. This was different. Thick. Heavy. It seemed to rise out of nowhere, rolling down the hill like a living thing, swallowing up the path ahead. I had no choice but to slow down, the road disappearing under a white, swirling curtain. The trees on either side were barely visible, their dark shapes looming like shadows in the haze. I'm not one for superstitions, but there was something about this fog that felt wrong. It wasn't just the fog itself, it was the way it moved, as if it was aware of me, following me as I drove. I pulled the car over to the side, my breath coming a little faster now. I'd never seen anything like this before. The air was damp, clinging to my skin, and I felt a sudden, inexplicable urge to leave, to turn around and drive back home. But there was something else, something pulling me in. My name is Jack, and I've never believed in ghosts or any of that nonsense. But the first time I saw the fog, I knew something wasn't right. I had this overwhelming sense that if I stayed, if I stepped into that mist, I'd see something I wasn't supposed to see. But curiosity, or maybe foolishness, got the better of me. I grabbed my jacket from the passenger seat and stepped out of the car, the cold air biting at my face as I made my way toward the hill. The fog thickened around me as I walked, swallowing the world whole. The trees around me were mere shadows now, and even the road beneath my feet felt strange, as if it had changed in the mist. I tried to shake off the unease creeping up my spine. It was just fog. Nothing more. But the deeper I went, the stranger it became. The world around me seemed to vanish, replaced by something else. The distant sounds of birds and wind had disappeared, leaving only the soft rustling of the fog moving through the branches. My footsteps were muffled, as if the ground itself was absorbing the sound, as if it didn't want anyone to know I was there. I took another step, and then another, and that's when I saw it. At first, it was just a shape, a silhouette standing in the fog. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. There was something wrong about it. The figure was tall, unnaturally tall, and as it moved, I could see it wasn't walking like a normal person. It seemed to glide, its outline shifting and warping like smoke. My heart began to race, and I took a step back, but my feet felt heavy, as if the ground itself was holding me in place. It's just the fog, I told myself. It's just the fog playing tricks. But then I saw the eyes. Two glowing orbs, piercing through the fog like headlights in the distance, glaring at me from the shape. And I felt it, the weight of its gaze. It was like it was looking right into me, through me, seeing things I didn't want anyone to see. I couldn't move. My legs wouldn't work. The air was thick, suffocating, and I could hear the faintest whispers, like voices carried on the wind, speaking in a language I didn't understand. Go back. Turn around. The voice, or voices, were distant but insistent. I finally managed to tear my gaze away from the figure, my heart pounding in my chest as I stumbled back toward the car. But when I turned to leave, the fog had thickened even more, swirling around me like a living thing, closing in on all sides. I heard something behind me, a sound that made my blood run cold. A low, scraping noise. It was coming from the ground. The same noise I'd heard earlier, faint and distant, but now it was closer. Louder. Something was moving, something was following me. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end as I quickened my pace. I wasn't sure if it was the fog, the figure, or something else entirely, but I knew one thing: I had to get out of there. I reached my car, fumbling for the door handle with trembling hands. The fog was closing in faster, faster than I could think. As I slammed the door shut, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The figure, the thing, was gone, but I could still feel its eyes on me, staring through the fog. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white, and I floored the gas pedal, speeding down the hill, desperate to escape. But no matter how fast I drove, the fog was always there, following me, creeping at the edges of my vision, never quite letting go. I kept driving, the road in front of me disappearing into nothingness. And I couldn't help but wonder, if I'd gone a little further, if I'd let the fog swallow me whole, what would I have seen then? Would I have been able to come back? Would I have been the same? The answer, I feared, was that I'd never know. The fog followed me all the way down. I didn't stop until I was back in town, where the mist finally thinned, letting the daylight break through. But even after I parked the car and stepped out, the feeling stayed with me, clinging to my skin like the cold. It was as if the fog had seeped into me, into my very bones, and I couldn't shake it off. I tried to convince myself it was nothing more than an odd weather pattern. Just a fluke. Fog didn't scare people. Not in Kentucky. But I couldn't forget the shape, the glowing eyes. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, that I had walked too far into the mist and started to see things. But then, the nightmares began. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back on that hill, surrounded by the fog. The whispering voices echoed in my ears, growing louder, more urgent. I could see the figure again, gliding through the mist, its eyes burning through the fog, staring at me. I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart hammering in my chest. The room felt small, too tight, like the walls were closing in. I rushed to the window and looked out toward the hills, but they were empty, bathed in the calm light of the moon. But I knew it wasn't over. Something wasn't right. I could feel it in the air, thick and heavy. I couldn't explain it, but I knew I wasn't imagining things. I hadn't told anyone about the fog or the figure. People around here would laugh, or worse, think I was losing my mind. I didn't want that. But when I ran into Sam, an old friend of mine, the conversation took an unexpected turn. Sam was the kind of guy who never believed in anything supernatural. He was the first to joke about ghost stories and anything that couldn't be explained by science. But when I mentioned the fog, his expression changed. Fog, huh? You've seen the hill? He asked, his voice low, almost hesitant. What do you mean? I asked, confused. Not everyone who's gone up there comes back the same. Some never come back at all. There's something about that hill, Jack. People around here, they've been talking. I looked at him, unsure if he was serious. What are you talking about? It's just fog. It happens sometimes. No, Sam said, shaking his head. It's not just fog. People have seen things, heard things. I'm telling you, you need to stay away from that hill. I felt a chill run down my spine. What kind of things? I asked, barely above a whisper. Sam hesitated, his eyes darting around as though to make sure no one was listening. Things from the past. People say the fog isn't just a weather phenomenon. They think it's something older. Something that makes you see them. Who? I asked, my throat dry. The people who used to live up there. The ones who died, or didn't get away in time. Sam's voice dropped to a near whisper. I've heard stories, Jack. Stories of people who went up and came back, changed. Like they're haunted by what they saw. And a few, they never came back at all. They vanished into the mist, and no one ever found them. I didn't know what to think. Was Sam just trying to scare me, or was there something more to it? He wasn't the kind of guy to joke about things like this, but it felt like he was only scratching the surface. I tried to push it out of my mind, but the unease never left me. It gnawed at me, a constant reminder that there was something out there I didn't understand. I knew I had to go back. I had to see for myself, to find out what was really happening on that hill. The curiosity was eating at me, and no matter how much I wanted to ignore it, I couldn't. The next day, I drove back to the hill, feeling a knot tighten in my stomach. The road was the same, winding and narrow, but when I reached the top, I felt a coldness in the air, even though the sun was shining. The fog was there, thick and looming, rolling over the ground like smoke. I parked the car, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew I shouldn't go in, but I couldn't stop myself. This time, I was more prepared. I had a flashlight in my hand, and I told myself I would turn back at the first sign of anything strange. But the moment I stepped out of the car, the fog enveloped me again. It was colder than before, and I could barely see a few feet in front of me. I started walking, my footsteps muffled by the thick mist. Everything felt wrong. The silence was suffocating, and it felt as if the world around me was waiting, holding its breath. Every now and then, I thought I could hear something, a faint whisper, a creaking sound. But when I stopped and listened, there was nothing. Only the fog, thick and oppressive. I reached the spot where I had seen the figure the day before. But there was nothing now, only the fog swirling around me, stretching into the distance. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. And that's when I heard it, the sound of something moving, shifting in the mist. A scrape, followed by a heavy thud, like something large dragging across the ground. I froze. My heart stopped. It's just an animal, I tried to convince myself. It's nothing. But then I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming toward me. Each step was heavy, like someone, was walking through the fog with intent. I swallowed hard, my pulse racing as I took a step back, my flashlight trembling in my hand. The footsteps grew louder, closer, and then I saw it. Two glowing eyes, piercing the fog, fixed on me with an intensity that made my blood run cold. The figure was back. I didn't wait to see what it would do next. I turned and ran, my breath coming in short gasps, the fog swirling around me as I tried to escape. But no matter how fast I ran, the footsteps kept pace. It was following me. I stumbled, my heart pounding in my ears, as I pushed through the mist, desperate to get back to the car, to the safety of the road. But I could feel it closing in, could feel the weight of those eyes on my back, chasing me, never letting go. My legs burned as I stumbled through the thick fog, the cold air stinging my lungs with every breath. The footsteps behind me never faltered. They were relentless, heavy, growing closer with every passing second. It was like whatever was in the mist was gaining on me, moving faster than I could ever hope to. I couldn't see more than a few feet in front of me. The fog was suffocating, crawling into my throat, my ears, blurring everything. I had to focus, had to get back to the car. But with each step, my confidence wavered. What if I couldn't make it? What if I was already too late? The first snap of a twig beneath my foot made me stumble, but I pushed on, my hands trembling as I reached for the flashlight. The beam flickered once, twice, and then went out. Panic rose in my chest, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. I could feel something behind me, something wrong. It was just waiting for me to falter, to slow down. I wiped the cold sweat from my brow and forced my legs to move faster. There was nothing but the sound of my hurried breathing and those damn footsteps, still behind me, getting closer. The trees loomed like dark sentinels, their branches clawing at the mist. I felt their presence too, but there was something much worse in the air, something that wasn't supposed to be in this world. The fog seemed to thicken, wrapping around me like a suffocating shroud. The ground beneath my feet shifted, the path unrecognizable now, every familiar marker swallowed up by the haze. I thought I saw the outline of my car just ahead, but when I took another step forward, I wasn't sure. Was it my mind playing tricks on me, or had I lost my way completely? The footsteps didn't stop. They were so close now that I could almost feel the weight of them. I glanced over my shoulder, hoping for some glimpse of what was chasing me, but there was nothing. The fog clung too thickly. The silence was broken only by the sound of my own panicked breathing and the slow, methodical footsteps. Then it came. A low growl, distant but unmistakable, ripped through the air, sending a shock of ice down my spine. I froze. The growl wasn't an animal. It was something deeper, more guttural, like it had come from the earth itself. I didn't stop to think. I sprinted, my feet barely touching the ground as I pushed forward, through the fog, through the cold. My breath was ragged, my chest tight, but I had no choice. My car was somewhere ahead. I couldn't stop. I couldn't let whatever it was catch me. But then I heard it. A voice. A whisper at first, faint and fleeting, like it was carried on the wind. Then louder, closer, clearer. You shouldn't have come back. I jerked to a stop, my heart hammering. The voice was so close now, it felt like it was right beside me, in the fog, but there was nothing. No figure. No shadow. I strained my ears, but the fog swallowed the sound, making it impossible to tell if it had been real or just my mind spiraling. I had to get out of here. Whatever this was, it wasn't just in the mist. It was in my head too. I took a step forward, then another, not caring if I was running in the wrong direction anymore. I just needed to escape. But as I ran, the ground underfoot shifted, the trail becoming uneven, as if I was no longer on the path I had walked earlier. Then I saw it. The figure. This time, there were no glowing eyes. Instead, a faint silhouette, barely visible through the fog, moved toward me with unnatural speed. It was tall, unnaturally tall, and its limbs stretched too far, like it had been twisted into some form that didn't belong in this world. It was the same figure I had seen before, but now it was no longer just a shape in the mist. It was real, and it was coming for me. I couldn't breathe. My body went numb. There was no escape. No way out. It reached for me with long, skeletal fingers, moving faster than I could comprehend, its breath a cold, foul wind. My legs gave out beneath me, and I fell, crashing into the damp earth. The figure towered over me, its face obscured by the fog, but its eyes, I saw them. Glowing, burning with a malicious light, fixed on me with an intensity that made my stomach twist. I wanted to scream, but the air felt thick, and no sound escaped. The fog closed in on me, wrapping around me like chains, dragging me deeper into the shadow of the figure. And then the voice came again, whispering in my ear, like it was inside my skull. "This is where you belong now." A flash of cold, sharp pain pierced through me, and for a brief moment, I thought it was over. But then, a terrible silence fell. The air grew still, thick with an almost palpable tension. I didn't dare move. I didn't dare breathe. And then, suddenly, the fog lifted. I didn't know how long I had been on the ground, but when I opened my eyes again, the mist was gone. The trees were still, the moonlight breaking through the branches. I could hear the distant rustle of the leaves in the wind, but the oppressive weight was gone. I pushed myself up slowly, my legs shaking. There was no sign of the figure. No sign of anything. But I knew it wasn't over. I could still feel its eyes on me. The fog hadn't disappeared. It was inside me now, burrowing deep into my mind. It was only a matter of time before I went back, before I found it again. And next time, I wouldn't be so lucky. It had been days since the fog had lifted, but the feeling hadn't left. Every time I closed my eyes, I could still hear the whisper, feel the cold touch of that monstrous presence. It was as if the fog had followed me home, creeping into the corners of my mind, making every shadow seem threatening. I tried to push it away, to live my life like I used to, but nothing felt the same. The city felt different, distant, empty, as if it were all a dream I was slowly waking up from. I kept my days normal, though. Work, meals, the small talk of acquaintances, all of it felt like I was just going through the motions. But every night, when the lights dimmed and I was alone with my thoughts, the dread returned, gnawing at my insides. And that voice, it would echo in the back of my mind, "This is where you belong now." I tried to dismiss it. I tried to convince myself that I was being paranoid, that I was just a victim of my own fear. But something about that place, the hill with its fog, had etched itself into my soul. It called to me. No matter how hard I tried to ignore it, I couldn't get rid of the nagging urge to go back. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I found myself standing at the foot of the hill again. I hadn't meant to come here. I had told myself I would never return. But there I was, staring at the mist creeping across the ground, curling around the trees like a living thing. It was different now, thicker, darker. The air was colder, heavier. I stood there, frozen, my heart racing in my chest. My instincts screamed at me to turn back, to run, but my feet refused to move. There was something pulling me forward, something I couldn't fight. A need to face whatever haunted me. I had to know what it was. I had to know what the fog wanted. The ground beneath my feet felt unstable, like it was shifting, becoming uneven, as though the earth itself was alive. The first steps I took were tentative, but as the fog thickened, so did my resolve. With each step, the world around me seemed to fade away. The familiar landmarks disappeared, and I was swallowed by the mist, along with my thoughts and whatever else lay hidden in the fog. It was quiet, too quiet, just the distant sound of my footsteps in the soft earth. I could barely make out the trees around me, their branches twisted and reaching, like dark arms trying to pull me deeper. My breath quickened as the feeling of being watched returned. I wasn't alone. The faintest sound of scratching, like claws on stone, reached my ears. It was far off, but unmistakable. I froze. My heart pounded. The growl from before, that guttural, inhuman sound, it was there again, but this time it was closer. Much closer. I spun around, my eyes wide, scanning the fog for any movement, but there was nothing. Just shadows, stretching and shifting as if they were alive. The growl came again, this time louder, more distinct, like it was right behind me. I didn't dare turn my back. The panic surged again, my body screaming at me to flee, but I knew better now. There was no escaping it. It was coming for me, and running wouldn't help. Suddenly, the ground beneath me cracked. I stumbled, nearly losing my balance, and looked down. The earth was splitting apart, revealing a dark, yawning abyss, like the hill itself was opening its mouth to swallow me whole. The mist poured from it, thicker than before, swirling and twisting, as if it had a mind of its own. I heard it then, footsteps, unmistakable, coming from the fog. But they weren't human. They were too heavy, too deliberate, like the sound of something monstrous stalking its prey. The fog parted slightly in front of me, and there it was, the thing I had felt, the thing I had seen in the mist. It stood tall, its form grotesque and warped, towering above the ground. Its limbs stretched unnaturally long, twisted like branches, and its eyes, they were the same as before, glowing, burning with an intense hunger. I froze, paralyzed by fear. It stepped closer, its shape more defined with every second. My breath came in ragged gasps, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. But I couldn't move. Not anymore. The figure towered over me, its presence suffocating, its eyes never leaving mine. The growl came again, deep and resonant, vibrating in my chest. Then, as if the fog had a voice of its own, it whispered, just like before, "You've come back, to stay." I staggered back, my mind racing, desperate for an explanation, for something, anything, that would make sense of this nightmare. But there was nothing. There was only the figure, the mist, and the weight of the world pressing down on me. It moved, its limbs extending in impossible ways, its hand reaching toward me, and I couldn't stop it. The air thickened around me, suffocating, as the fog closed in again, swallowing the light, the sound, and everything familiar. I was lost. And this time, I knew there was no escaping it. It had already taken me. The darkness enveloped me, thick and suffocating. My body refused to move, each breath labored as if the very air itself had turned to lead. I could feel its eyes on me, burning, an unblinking gaze that pierced through the fog like a knife through flesh. The world outside was gone, replaced by this oppressive, endless mist. I was no longer on the hill, nor was I anywhere I recognized. Time itself felt suspended, as if it had ceased to exist. The monstrous figure loomed in front of me, its presence undeniable and terrifying. Its limbs twisted, contorted, and stretched in unnatural ways, each movement sending shivers through my spine. The air around it shimmered, like heat rising from an inferno, but there was no warmth. Only cold, biting cold that seemed to seep into my very bones. It spoke again, its voice a rasping whisper that seemed to come from all directions at once, curling around my thoughts, drowning me in its weight. "You're mine now." I tried to move, to fight back, but my body was frozen, as though I was caught in a nightmare from which I couldn't escape. My hands trembled, my legs refused to obey. Panic surged, but I couldn't scream, couldn't even make a sound. The fog seemed to choke my very voice, suffocating it before it could escape. The figure tilted its head, its face obscured in shadow, but I could feel its presence, every inch of it. It was close now, so close I could hear the rasp of its breath, feel its cold emanating from the void between us. The fog churned, wrapping around my legs, pulling me deeper into the abyss. I stumbled forward, my legs weak beneath me, but I was falling. Falling into the blackness, where there was no hope of finding solid ground. But then, just as I thought I would be swallowed whole, I felt a strange pull, an irresistible force. The figure's hand shot out, its fingers curling around my arm with an unnatural strength. It yanked me towards it, and I was helpless, caught in its grasp. "Don't fight it," it whispered, its voice now smooth and cold, like the touch of death itself. "You belong to me now. You always have." The words echoed in my mind, making my thoughts spin in confusion. What did it mean? What was this? Why had I come back? Had I ever truly left? The fog seemed to grow thicker, the shadows deeper, as if the very world around me was fading away, leaving only the figure and me in this vast, empty space. The ground beneath us seemed to ripple, warping and distorting as though it were alive, pulsing with a strange energy. I tried again to pull away, to escape, but the figure's grip tightened, its fingers digging into my skin. Pain shot through my arm, but it wasn't enough to break the paralysis that had settled over me. I was trapped in the fog, trapped in its gaze, trapped in its world. The figure leaned closer, its face now visible, though it was still shrouded in the darkness. I couldn't make out its features fully, but I could see its eyes, those burning, glowing eyes, filled with a hunger that seemed to go on forever. They locked onto mine, and I felt a pull, a deep connection, something ancient and insidious. "You see now, don't you?" the figure murmured, its voice soft but filled with a terrible certainty. "You are part of this. You always have been. The fog is not just here. It is part of you. You are mine. Always." A wave of realization crashed over me, flooding my mind with the truth. This fog, it wasn't just a place, a phenomenon. It was an entity, something alive, something that had always been, lurking beneath the surface of reality. It had been waiting for me, and I had led it to this place. My breath quickened as the horror set in. The hill, the fog, the visions, it had all been a trap. A trap for me, for anyone who wandered too close. I had been lured in, unable to resist, unable to see the truth until it was too late. And now, I was bound to it. There was no escaping the fog. No escaping it. The figure's grip loosened, and I felt the weight of its presence, as if it were absorbing me, pulling me into itself, into the mist. I couldn't see anymore. I couldn't feel. I was nothing, lost in the endless void, becoming part of the fog itself. I thought of the world above, of the city, of the people I had known. All of it felt so distant, so far away, like a dream I could no longer reach. The fog had claimed me, and with it, I had become one with the darkness. The last thing I heard before the silence overtook me was the faintest whisper, a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "You're home." And then, nothing. The fog claimed everything. This has been a long, dark journey through the night with Whisper Crowley. Thank you for staying with us until the end. Leave a like if these stories made you look at the darkness a little differently, and share in the comments what you enjoyed most or what gave you chills. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss our next Sinister Whispers. Until we meet again in the world of shadows.